The genealogical traditions surrounding Atalanta present one of the most complex webs of parentage in Greek mythology, with ancient sources offering competing accounts that reflect the regional variations and evolving nature of oral tradition. The most widely accepted lineage traces her father to King Iasus of Arcadia, a figure whose own ancestry connects directly to the primordial rulers of the mountainous region in the central Peloponnese. Iasus himself descended from Lycaon, the legendary king whose transformation into a wolf by Zeus became emblematic of divine punishment for hubris, establishing a pattern of divine intervention that would echo through his descendants' life. Ancient sources provide varying accounts of Iasus's character and reign. Apollodorus, writing in the 2nd century BC, presents him as a traditional Arcadian monarch, deeply concerned with maintaining his bloodline and securing succession. This portrayal aligns with the broader pattern of Greek kingship, where royal authority depended heavily on legitimate male heirs and the continuation of dynastic power. The historian Pausanias, documenting his travels through Greece in the 2nd century AD, offers additional details about Iasus's rule, describing him as a king who maintained the ancient customs of Arcadia while struggling with the pressures of a changing world where traditional values increasingly conflicted with practical necessities. The identity of Atalanta's mother remains significantly more obscured in the historical record, with different traditions offering conflicting accounts. Some sources name Clymen, a figure associated with various Oceanid lineages, while others suggest Neaera, or even unnamed local nymphs. This uncertainty reflects the common pattern in Greek genealogical traditions, where maternal lineages, particularly those involving minor deities or regional figures, became less standardized over time. The ambiguity surrounding her mother's identity may also serve a narrative function, emphasizing Atalanta's connection to the wild, untamed aspects of nature that would define her character throughout the mythological tradition. Regional variations in Atalanta's genealogy reveal the complex process by which local traditions merged with broader Greek mythological frameworks. The Boeotian tradition, preserved in fragments of early epic poetry and local cult practices, presents a notably different account of her parentage. In this version, her father appears as Schoenius, a king of Boeotia whose name derives from the Greek word for rush or reed, possibly indicating a connection to marshy or riverine territories. This alternative genealogy reflects the tendency of different Greek regions to claim significant mythological figures as their own, adapting stories to reflect local geography, customs, and political structures. The Boeotian's Schoenius emerges in the sources as a figure quite different from the Arcadian Iasus. Where Iasus represents the traditional mountain king, bound to ancient customs and divine mandates, Schoenius appears more pragmatic, willing to use his daughter's exceptional abilities for political advantage. This distinction becomes crucial when examining the different versions of Atalanta's story, as the Boeotian tradition tends to emphasize her role in dynastic politics, rather than her connection to wilderness and divine favour. Archaeological evidence from both Arcadia and Boeotia supports the existence of distinct cult practices associated with Atalanta, suggesting that these genealogical variations reflect genuine regional traditions rather than later literary inventions. Votive offerings discovered at sites in both regions include items specifically associated with female athletic prowess and hunting skills, indicating that communities in both areas maintained active worship practices centered on Atalanta's legendary abilities. The differences in these archaeological remains mirror the genealogical variations, with Arcadian sites emphasizing wilderness themes, while Boeotian locations focus more heavily on competitive athletics and formal contests. The oracle's prophecy regarding Atalanta's marriage represents one of the most significant prophetic pronouncements in Greek mythology, establishing a central tension that would drive the entire narrative of her life. The specific wording of this prophecy varies across ancient sources, but the core message remains consistent. Marriage would bring ruin, not only to Atalanta herself but potentially to her entire lineage. This prophetic warning follows the established pattern of Greek oracular pronouncements, which typically presented unavoidable fates while leaving the specific mechanisms of fulfillment deliberately ambiguous. The oracle at Delphi, the most likely source of this prophecy according to most ancient accounts, had established itself as the primary source of divine guidance for Greek royalty by the 8th century BC. The Pythia's pronouncements carried enormous weight in royal decision-making, particularly regarding matters of succession and marriage alliances. For King Iasus, receiving such a prophecy about his daughter would have created an impossible dilemma. Defying the oracle risked divine punishment, while accepting its message meant acknowledging that his daughter could never fulfill the traditional role expected of royal women. The specific nature of the ruin foretold by the oracle remains deliberately vague in most sources, contributing to the prophecy's power and flexibility within the mythological tradition. Some interpretations suggest that the ruin would manifest as the destruction of Iasus's royal line, while others imply broader consequences affecting the entire kingdom of Arcadia. This ambiguity allowed different versions of the story to explore various outcomes while maintaining the essential prophetic framework that justified Atalanta's unconventional life path. The psychological impact of this prophecy on both Iasus and Atalanta herself becomes a crucial element in understanding their subsequent actions. For Iasus, the oracle's warning transformed his daughter from a potential asset in political marriages into a liability that threatened his entire dynasty. The king found himself caught between paternal affection and royal responsibility, a conflict that ancient sources suggest tormented him throughout Atalanta's childhood. The prophecy essentially removed the primary social function expected of royal daughters in ancient Greek society, forcing both father and daughter to navigate uncharted territory in their relationship. Atalanta's abandonment as an infant represents one of the most symbolically charged elements of her origin story, connecting her narrative to a broader pattern of exposure myths that permeate Greek literature and religious tradition. The practice of infant exposure, while historically documented in ancient Greece, carried profound symbolic meaning when applied to mythological figures. For royal children, exposure typically indicated either divine disfavour or an attempt to circumvent prophetic warnings, with the abandoned infant's survival often interpreted as evidence of divine protection or special destiny. The specific circumstances of Atalanta's exposure vary among ancient sources, but most accounts place the event on Mount Parthenion in Arcadia, a location whose name derives from the Greek word for virgin, foreshadowing Atalanta's lifelong commitment to chastity. The mountain's rugged terrain, dense forests, and abundant wildlife created an environment that would prove ideal for shaping the skills and character that would define Atalanta's legendary abilities. The choice of this particular location for her abandonment may reflect genuine topographical knowledge of Arcadia, as Mount Parthenion's slopes contain numerous caves and sheltered areas where an infant might conceivably survive with divine assistance. The symbolic significance of exposure in Greek mythology extends far beyond the immediate narrative function of separating the hero from conventional society. Exposure represents a form of ritual death and rebirth, with the abandoned infant emerging from the experience fundamentally transformed and often possessing abilities or knowledge unavailable to those raised in conventional circumstances. This pattern appears repeatedly in Greek heroic narratives, from Perseus to Oedipus, but Atalanta's case presents unique elements that distinguish her story from the standard exposure myth. The involvement of bears in Atalanta's rescue and early nurturing adds another layer of symbolic meaning to her abandonment story. Bears held special significance in ancient Greek religious tradition, particularly in connection with Artemis, the virgin goddess of the hunt. The Brauronia festival, celebrated at the sanctuary of Artemis at Brauron, required young Athenian girls to serve as arktoi, or little bears, performing ritual duties that prepared them for adult womanhood. Atalanta's nurturing by actual bears creates a direct connection to this religious tradition, while simultaneously marking her as existing outside normal human social structures. The duration of Atalanta's time in the wilderness varies among ancient sources, with some accounts suggesting she remained with the bears for several years, while others imply a shorter period before her discovery by hunters or shepherds. This variation reflects different emphases within the mythological tradition. Longer periods in the wild emphasize her complete separation from human society and her development of supernatural abilities, while shorter durations focus more on the immediate circumstances of her rescue and integration into human communities. The hunters who eventually discovered Atalanta represent a crucial transitional element in her story, serving as intermediaries between the completely wild environment of her early childhood and the semi-civilized world she would inhabit as a young woman. These figures, typically described as followers of Artemis or devotees of traditional hunting practices, recognized in the bear-raised child something extraordinary that warranted preservation and training rather than simple return to conventional society. Their decision to raise her according to their own customs, rather than attempting to restore her to royal status, reflects an understanding that her unique origins had created capabilities that would be wasted in traditional feminine roles. The geographical variations between Arcadian and Boeotian versions of Atalanta's origin story reflect broader differences in regional culture, topography, and religious practice that shaped how different Greek communities understood and transmitted mythological narratives. Arcadia's mountainous terrain, extensive forests, and traditional emphasis on hunting and pastoralism created an ideal setting for stories emphasizing wilderness skills and divine connection to nature. The region's relative isolation from major urban centers allowed older traditions to persist longer than in more cosmopolitan areas, contributing to the preservation of mythological elements that might have been modified or abandoned elsewhere. Boeotian versions of Atalanta's story, by contrast, reflect the region's different geographical and cultural characteristics. Boeotia's relatively flat terrain, agricultural focus, and proximity to major trade routes created a society more concerned with formal competition, political alliances, and economic prosperity than with wilderness survival and divine communion. These differences manifest in the varying emphasis placed on different aspects of Atalanta's abilities and achievements, with Boeotian traditions highlighting her success in formal athletic competitions, while Arcadian accounts focus more heavily on her hunting prowess and connection to wild animals. The process by which these regional variations developed and spread throughout the Greek world illustrates the dynamic nature of mythological tradition in ancient Greece. Local communities maintained their own versions of significant stories while remaining aware of alternative traditions preserved elsewhere. This awareness created opportunities for creative synthesis, with poets and storytellers combining elements from different regional traditions to create new versions that served their particular artistic or political purposes. The result was a rich, multi-layered mythological tradition that could accommodate multiple interpretations while maintaining essential narrative coherence. The sacred bear that discovered the abandoned infant Atalanta on the slopes of Mount Parthenion represented far more than a simple act of animal compassion. Archaeological evidence from sanctuaries dedicated to Artemis throughout Arcadia reveals extensive bear imagery and votive offerings, temple decorations, and ritual objects dating from the 8th century BC onward. These findings suggest that the bear's role in Atalanta's rescue reflects deeply embedded religious beliefs about the goddess's protective relationship with both wild animals and vulnerable humans who existed outside conventional social structures. The specific species of bear involved in Atalanta's nurturing appears to have been the Eurasian brown bear, which inhabited the mountainous regions of ancient Greece until the early medieval period. These bears, significantly larger and more formidable than their modern European cousins, could reach weights of over 300 kilograms and possess the intelligence and adaptability necessary to recognize and respond to human distress. Ancient Greek sources consistently describe the bear that found Atalanta as a female with recent cubs of her own, a detail that provides biological plausibility for the adoption behavior while reinforcing the maternal symbolism central to the narrative. The bear's discovery of Atalanta likely occurred during the spring months, when adult females with new cubs would range widely across their territories in search of food sources adequate to support lactation. Mount Parthenion's diverse ecosystem, including oak groves that produced abundant acorns, berry-rich undergrowth, and streams supporting fish populations, would have attracted bears during this crucial feeding period. The timing becomes significant when considering that spring births were common among Greek royal families, as they allowed infants to develop strength before the challenging winter months. Artemis's connection to bears extended throughout the ancient Greek world, with the goddess frequently depicted wearing bear pelts, or accompanied by these animals in artistic representations. The sanctuary at Brauron, approximately 40 kilometers northeast of Athens, maintained live bears as part of its religious observances, with young priestesses called arktoi serving the goddess, while wearing saffron-coloured robes meant to evoke bear fur. This practice, documented in both literary sources and archaeological remains, demonstrates that the association between Artemis and bears represented active religious belief rather than mere mythological metaphor. The symbolism of bear rearing in ancient Greek culture carried multiple layers of meaning that would profoundly influence how audiences understood Atalanta's character and destiny. Bears represented the boundary between civilization and wilderness, possessing intelligence and social organization while remaining fundamentally wild and unpredictable. A human child raised by bears would therefore embody this liminal status, capable of functioning in human society while retaining essential wildness that set them apart from conventional social expectations. Ancient Greek medical and philosophical texts, including works attributed to Aristotle and his students, describe bear behavior with remarkable accuracy, noting their capacity for complex problem-solving, their fierce protection of young, and their ability to adapt to changing environmental conditions. These observations provided intellectual framework for understanding how a bear could successfully nurture a human infant, lending credibility to what might otherwise appear as pure fantasy. The Greeks understood that bears possessed maternal instincts powerful enough to extend beyond species boundaries under exceptional circumstances. The process of Atalanta's integration into bear society would have required significant behavioral adaptation on both sides. Human infants possessed different nutritional needs, vocal patterns, and developmental schedules compared to bear cubs, necessitating adjustments in the adoptive mother's care strategies. Ancient sources suggest that Artemis herself intervened to facilitate this process, ensuring that Atalanta could digest bear milk and communicate effectively with her adoptive family through modified vocalizations and gestures. The duration of Atalanta's time with the bears, estimated at approximately 5 years based on various ancient accounts, represents a critical period in human development when fundamental behavioral patterns, language acquisition, and social understanding typically occur. Children raised outside human society during these years often develop alternative communication systems, enhance sensory awareness, and survival skills that persist throughout their lives. Atalanta's legendary abilities in tracking, hunting, and wilderness survival reflect precisely these adaptations. Her daily routine during this period would have followed bear family patterns, including extensive foraging expeditions, seasonal migrations between feeding areas, and winter denning periods that required careful preparation and resource management. These experiences provided Atalanta with intimate knowledge of forest ecosystems, weather patterns, and animal behavior that would prove invaluable throughout her later adventures. Ancient sources describe her ability to predict weather changes, locate water sources in drought conditions, and identify edible plants with accuracy that surpassed even experienced hunters. The physical demands of bear family life contributed significantly to Atalanta's legendary athletic abilities. Bear cubs engage in extensive play fighting, climbing, and endurance activities that develop strength, agility, and coordination. A human child participating in these activities would necessarily develop exceptional physical capabilities, particularly in areas like running speed, climbing ability, and overall stamina. Archaeological evidence from Greek athletic sites includes references to female competitors with abilities that contemporary observers attributed to divine favour or supernatural origins. The psychological impact of bear rearing extended beyond practical skills to fundamental aspects of personality and worldview. Bears maintain complex social hierarchies based on individual capability rather than inherited status, a system that would have profoundly influenced Atalanta's later rejection of traditional gender roles and social expectations. Her adoptive bear family would have evaluated her contributions based on actual performance in hunting, foraging, and family protection, rather than conventional human standards of feminine behaviour. The rescue of Atalanta by human hunters represents a carefully orchestrated transition that ancient sources attribute to Artemis's direct intervention. These hunters, described as devotees of the goddess who maintained traditional hunting practices and wilderness skills, possessed the expertise necessary to recognize Atalanta's unique situation and respond appropriately. Rather than attempting immediate reintegration into conventional society, they understood that her bear rearing required specialized handling and gradual adaptation to human customs. The hunters who discovered Atalanta belonged to a specific category of Artemis worshippers, known for their dedication to traditional hunting methods and their rejection of urban civilization's increasing sophistication. These individuals maintained semi-permanent camps in wilderness areas, following seasonal game migrations and participating in religious observances at remote forest shrines. Their lifestyle provided an ideal intermediate stage for Atalanta's transition from bear family to human society. Archaeological excavations at hunter camps throughout Arcadia reveal evidence of extended occupation periods, sophisticated tool-making capabilities, and religious practices centered on Artemis worship. These sites typically include specialized areas for weapon maintenance, food preparation, and ritual activities, suggesting organized communities rather than simple temporary shelters. The hunters who raised Atalanta would have possessed both the practical skills and religious understanding necessary to guide her development, while preserving her unique abilities. The training regimen implemented by Atalanta's human guardians built upon her bear-derived abilities, while introducing specifically human techniques and equipment. Ancient sources describe intensive instruction in archery, spear throwing, and formal hunting strategies that complemented her existing tracking and stalking skills. This combination of bear-learned wilderness survival and human-taught weapon mastery created a skill set that surpassed what either tradition could achieve independently. The religious instruction Atalanta received from her hunter guardians proved equally significant in shaping her character and future choices. These devotees of Artemis maintained strict codes of conduct regarding chastity, respect for nature, and rejection of conventional social hierarchies that aligned perfectly with Atalanta's bear-derived values. Their teachings reinforced her natural inclinations, while providing a religious framework for understanding her unique position in relation to both divine will and human society. Evidence from ancient Greek religious sites suggests that bear cults associated with Artemis worship maintained active practices throughout the classical period, with specific rituals designed to honor the goddess's protective relationship with both bears and humans who lived according to wilderness principles. These practices included seasonal festivals, hunting ceremonies, and coming-of-age rituals that celebrated the boundary-crossing abilities of individuals like Atalanta, who embodied both human and animal characteristics. The archaeological record from sites associated with bear cults reveals sophisticated understanding of bear behaviour, seasonal patterns, and ecological relationships that informed religious practices and mythological narratives. Votive offerings frequently include bear claws, teeth, and fur worked into ceremonial objects, while temple decorations feature detailed bear imagery that demonstrates careful observation of actual animal behaviour rather than stylized artistic convention. Textual evidence from ancient Greek sources provides additional insight into the religious significance of bear-human relationships within Artemis worship. Fragments of hymns, ritual instructions, and philosophical discussions preserved in later compilations describe bears as intermediaries between the human and divine realms, capable of conveying Artemis's will to mortal worshippers while maintaining their essential wildness. This theological framework provided context for understanding Atalanta's unique status and abilities. The influence of bear cult practices on Atalanta's mythological development extends beyond simple narrative elements to fundamental aspects of her character and symbolic meaning within Greek culture. Her rejection of traditional feminine roles, her exceptional physical abilities, and her complex relationship with both wilderness and civilization all reflect religious concepts associated with Artemis worship and bear symbolism that permeated ancient Greek spiritual life. Regional variations in bear cult practices contributed to the different versions of Atalanta's story, preserved in various ancient sources, with Arcadian traditions emphasizing wilderness survival and divine connection, while other regions focused more heavily on formal athletic competition and social integration. These differences reflect local adaptations of broader religious themes, rather than fundamental disagreements about Atalanta's essential character or significance. The transition from bear-raised child to devoted huntress of Artemis marked a profound transformation in Atalanta's development, one that would define her relationship with both the divine and mortal realms for the remainder of her life. Her formal dedication to Artemis occurred during her adolescent years, likely around the age of 14, when her human guardians recognized that her exceptional abilities and bear-derived characteristics aligned perfectly with the goddess's requirements for her most elite followers. This dedication ceremony, conducted at a remote shrine deep within the Arcadian wilderness, involved rituals that bound Atalanta not only to Artemis's service, but to a lifelong vow of chastity that would become central to her identity and legendary status. The vow of chastity required of Artemis's devoted huntresses extended far beyond simple celibacy to encompass a complete rejection of traditional feminine roles within Greek society. Ancient sources describe this commitment as a sacred contract that granted exceptional abilities in exchange for permanent separation from the conventional path of marriage, motherhood, and domestic responsibility. For Atalanta, whose bear-rearing had already established her outside normal social boundaries, this vow represented not sacrifice, but liberation from expectations that conflicted with her fundamental nature and divine calling. Archaeological evidence from Artemis sanctuaries throughout the Greek world reveals the existence of formal communities of female hunters, who maintained permanent residence at religious sites while serving the goddess through hunting, temple maintenance, and participation in sacred festivals. These communities, known as thiasoi, operated according to strict hierarchical structures based on hunting skill, religious knowledge, and length of service rather than family connections or social status. Atalanta's integration into such a community provided her with peer relationships based on shared abilities and values rather than conventional social arrangements. The daily routine of Artemis's devoted huntresses involved extensive training in various hunting techniques, weapon maintenance, tracking skills, and wilderness survival methods that built upon natural abilities while refining them through systematic instruction. Morning exercises typically included archery practice using targets at progressively greater distances, spear throwing competitions that emphasized both accuracy and power, and endurance running across varied terrain that developed the stamina necessary for extended hunting expeditions. These activities, documented in ancient training manuals and religious texts, created physical capabilities that contemporary observers often attributed to divine enhancement rather than systematic development. Atalanta's exceptional performance in these training regimens quickly established her reputation within the huntress community as possessing abilities that surpassed even veteran practitioners. Her bear-derived tracking skills, enhanced by human instruction in weapon use and hunting strategy, created a combination of capabilities that proved devastatingly effective in actual hunting situations. Ancient accounts describe her ability to follow game trails that other hunters could not detect, approach prey animals without triggering their flight responses, and execute kills with precision that minimized animal suffering while maximizing meat recovery. The religious significance of hunting within Artemis worship extended beyond practical considerations to encompass complex theological concepts about the relationship between civilization and wilderness, life and death, and human responsibility toward the natural world. Huntresses like Atalanta served as intermediaries between these opposing forces, maintaining the balance necessary for cosmic harmony while demonstrating proper respect for the animals they killed. This role required extensive knowledge of seasonal patterns, animal behavior, and ecological relationships that informed both hunting practices and religious observances. Sacred hunting expeditions conducted by Artemis's followers involved elaborate ritual preparations that included purification ceremonies, offerings to forest spirits, and invocations requesting the goddess's guidance in locating appropriate prey. These expeditions, lasting several days or even weeks, tested not only hunting skills but also the participants' ability to maintain ritual purity while living entirely within wilderness environments. Atalanta's bear-derived comfort with extended forest residence gave her significant advantages in these challenges, allowing her to focus on hunting objectives while other participants struggled with basic wilderness survival. The weapons employed by Artemis's huntresses reflected both practical effectiveness and religious symbolism, with each implement blessed according to specific rituals and maintained according to strict protocols. The silver-tipped arrows favoured by elite huntresses like Atalanta required exceptional skill to use effectively, as their lighter weight and different balance compared to standard bronze points demanded modified shooting techniques. Archaeological discoveries of such arrows at religious sites throughout Greece demonstrate their widespread use among Artemis worshippers, while their presence in burial contexts suggests they served as status symbols within huntress communities. Atalanta's mastery of the composite bow, a weapon requiring years of training to use effectively, demonstrated both her dedication to Artemis's service and her exceptional physical capabilities. These bows, constructed from multiple materials including wood, horn, and sinew, could generate draw weights exceeding 60 kilograms while maintaining accuracy at distances up to 200 meters. The strength required to draw such weapons repeatedly during extended hunting sessions demanded muscular development that ancient Greek society typically associated with male athletes and warriors rather than women. The cultural significance of female hunters in ancient Greek society reflected complex attitudes toward gender roles, religious authority, and the relationship between civilization and nature. While conventional Greek social structures relegated women to domestic roles under male authority, religious contexts provided exceptions that allowed exceptional individuals to transcend these limitations through divine service. Artemis worship specifically celebrated female independence, physical capability, and rejection of traditional feminine roles as expressions of divine favor rather than social deviance. Regional variations in attitudes toward female hunters created different levels of acceptance for figures like Atalanta throughout the Greek world. Arcadian society, with its emphasis on pastoral traditions and wilderness skills, generally welcomed female participation in hunting activities as practical necessity rather than social aberration. Urban centres like Athens and Corinth by contrast, viewed such behaviour with suspicion and often attributed exceptional female hunting abilities to divine intervention or supernatural origins rather than natural talent and training. The artistic representation of female hunters in ancient Greek pottery, sculpture, and temple decorations reveals evolving attitudes toward women who transgressed conventional gender boundaries. Early archaic period artwork typically depicted huntresses as masculine figures distinguished from male hunters primarily by clothing and hairstyles rather than body type or facial features. Classical period representations showed greater differentiation, portraying female hunters as distinctly feminine while maintaining the athletic build and confident bearing associated with hunting prowess. Literary sources from various periods provide additional insight into Greek attitudes toward exceptional female hunters like Atalanta. Epic poetry generally celebrated their achievements while emphasizing their connection to divine favor, suggesting that such abilities required supernatural explanation rather than simple human excellence. Tragic drama explored the social tensions created by women who rejected conventional roles, often focusing on the conflicts between personal desires and social expectations that characterize these figures' lives. Atalanta's role as a liminal figure existing between multiple opposing categories created unique opportunities and challenges that distinguished her from both conventional women and typical heroes. Her position between civilization and wilderness allowed her to serve as a bridge between human communities and the natural world, facilitating communication and understanding that benefited both realms. Simultaneously, this boundary-crossing status created suspicion and anxiety among those who preferred clear, categorical distinctions and predictable social roles. The masculine aspects of Atalanta's character and abilities reflected not simple gender reversal, but complex integration of traits typically associated with both male and female spheres of activity. Her exceptional physical strength, competitive nature, and rejection of domestic responsibilities aligned with masculine ideals, while her connection to Artemis, emphasis on chastity, and protective instincts towards vulnerable individuals reflected feminine virtues. This combination created a figure who transcended simple gender categories while embodying the best qualities of both. The wilderness environment that shaped Atalanta's development and provided the context for her greatest achievements represented more than simple geographical setting within Greek cultural understanding. Wilderness areas served as testing grounds where individuals could demonstrate their true capabilities without the artificial constraints imposed by civilized society. Success in wilderness contexts required authentic virtue, practical skill, and divine favor rather than social connections, inherited wealth, or conventional markers of status. Atalanta's exceptional performance in wilderness environments demonstrated her alignment with natural law and divine will rather than human social conventions. Her ability to thrive in conditions that challenged even experienced male hunters validated her rejection of traditional feminine roles, while proving that her unconventional lifestyle served higher purposes than simple personal preference or rebellious behavior. This validation provided religious and philosophical justification for her continued independence from conventional social expectations. The tracking abilities that distinguished Atalanta from other hunters involved complex integration of sensory information, environmental knowledge, and intuitive understanding that contemporary observers often attributed to supernatural enhancement. Ancient sources describe her capacity to identify individual animals by their tracks, determine their health status and behavioral patterns from physical signs, and predict their future movements with accuracy that enabled successful hunts even under challenging conditions. These skills, while exceptional, fell within the range of abilities documented among expert trackers in various cultures throughout history. The development of such tracking expertise required years of systematic observation, practice, and refinement that built upon the foundation established during Atalanta's bear rearing period. Her adoptive bear family's teaching methods, based on direct demonstration and immediate practical application, provided learning experiences that human instructional methods could rarely match. The combination of this early training with later human instruction in systematic analysis and strategic thinking created capabilities that surpassed what either approach could achieve independently. Modern analysis of tracking techniques described in ancient sources reveals sophisticated understanding of animal behavior, environmental factors, and interpretive methods that demonstrate genuine expertise rather than mythological embellishment. The specific details provided about Atalanta's tracking methods, including her attention to subtle variations in track depth, gait patterns, and associated environmental signs, align closely with techniques employed by expert trackers in contemporary hunting cultures. This consistency suggests that ancient accounts preserved accurate information about actual tracking practices rather than purely fictional abilities. The hunting strategies employed by Atalanta combined stealth, patience, and precise timing in ways that maximize success while minimizing risk to both hunter and prey. Ancient descriptions of her hunting methods emphasize careful observation of animal behavior patterns, selection of optimal positioning relative to wind direction and terrain features, and execution of kills that demonstrated respect for the animal's dignity and suffering. These practices reflected both practical effectiveness and religious requirements that governed sacred hunting activities. The great boar that terrorized the lands of Calydon emerged from the sacred groves of Artemis during the harvest season of what scholars estimate to have been around 1250 BC, though the mythological chronology places these events within the generation preceding the Trojan War. King Oeneus of Calydon had committed a grave oversight in his annual sacrifices to the gods, failing to honour Artemis with the first fruits of his harvest while lavishing offerings upon the other Olympian deities. This deliberate or inadvertent slight provoked the virgin goddess to unleash upon his kingdom a creature of supernatural size and ferocity that would become the catalyst for one of the most significant heroic gatherings in Greek legendary history. Ancient sources describe this divine boar as possessing dimensions that defied natural proportion, with tusks measuring the length of a grown man's forearm and bristles that stood as rigid as bronze spear points along its massive shoulders and spine. Ovid, writing in his Metamorphoses during the early 1st century AD, provides the most detailed physical description of the beast, noting its eyes that burned like coals from Hades' forges and its breath that withered vegetation as it passed. The creature's hide, according to multiple ancient accounts, possessed thickness and toughness that rendered conventional hunting weapons ineffective, requiring specially crafted spears and arrows to penetrate its supernatural defences. The devastation wrought by Artemis's boar across the Calydonian countryside exceeded typical animal depredation to reach proportions that threatened the kingdom's very survival. The beast systematically destroyed grain fields ready for harvest, uprooted entire orchards that had taken decades to mature, and contaminated water sources with its presence, rendering them unfit for human or animal consumption. Ancient agricultural calendars suggest that this destruction occurred during the crucial period when communities stored provisions for the winter months, meaning that the boar's rampage threatened not just immediate prosperity, but long-term survival for the entire population. The creature's attacks on human settlements demonstrated intelligence and malicious intent that surpassed normal animal behavior, suggesting direct divine guidance in its destructive activities. Witnesses described coordinated assaults on fortified positions, with the boar apparently understanding how to exploit structural weaknesses in walls and gates. Its ability to appear suddenly in widely separated locations within short time periods led some ancient commentators to suggest that Artemis had endowed it with supernatural speed, or the capacity for limited teleportation between sacred groves throughout the region. King Oeneus, recognizing that conventional hunting parties had proven utterly inadequate against this divine scourge, made the unprecedented decision to issue a general summons to all the heroes of Greece, offering substantial rewards for the boar's destruction. The prizes he announced included the creature's hide as the primary trophy, along with significant territorial grants, marriage alliances, and treasure sufficient to establish the victor as one of the wealthiest individuals in the Greek world. This generous reward structure reflected both the desperate nature of Calydon's situation and Oeneus's understanding that only the most exceptional heroes would possess the capability to confront a creature sent by an Olympian deity. The response to Oeneus's summons exceeded all expectations, drawing heroes from every corner of the Greek world in what became the largest heroic gathering outside of major military campaigns like the Trojan War. The assembled company included figures whose individual legends already filled epic cycles, creating a concentration of heroic talent that would never again be matched in a single expedition. Ancient catalogues of the participants vary in their specific details, but most sources agree that the gathering included representatives from virtually every significant heroic lineage in Greece. Meleager, son of Oeneus and heir to the Calydonian throne, naturally assumed leadership of the expedition despite his relative youth, compared to many of the assembled heroes. His claim to command rested not only on his royal status and intimate knowledge of the local terrain, but also on his exceptional skill with the javelin, a weapon particularly suited to boar hunting in the dense forests surrounding Calydon. Ancient sources describe Meleager as possessing the classical heroic physique, with broad shoulders, powerful arms developed through years of weapons training, and the quick reflexes necessary for close combat with dangerous prey. The Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, arrived from Sparta with their reputation as the greatest horsemen in Greece, though the forested terrain of the hunt would limit their mounted advantages. These twin sons of Zeus brought with them specialized hunting equipment, including nets designed for large game and spears, crafted by the finest metalworkers in Lacedaemon. Their presence added not only individual prowess, but also the tactical coordination that made them legendary in both warfare and athletic competition. Theseus, already famous for his conquest of the Minotaur and unification of Attica, joined the expedition during a period of relative peace in his reign as King of Athens. His experience with monsters and supernatural opponents made him one of the most valuable participants, as did his reputation for innovative tactical thinking under pressure. Ancient accounts describe him as bringing specialized equipment, including ropes and grappling hooks that might prove useful in restraining or maneuvering around a creature of the boar's size and strength. Jason, leader of the Argonauts and veteran of the quest for the Golden Fleece, represented perhaps the most experienced expedition commander among the assembled heroes. His proven ability to coordinate diverse groups of strong-willed individuals made him a natural advisor to Meleager, though their relationship would prove complex due to competing claims for overall leadership. Jason's contributions included not only his personal fighting abilities, but also his extensive knowledge of supernatural creatures acquired during his encounters with the monsters and divine beings encountered on the voyage to Colchis. Peleus, father of the future Achilles, brought to the hunt his reputation as one of the finest spearfighters of his generation, along with weapons forged by divine craftsmen that possessed supernatural sharpness and durability. His tactical expertise, developed through numerous military campaigns, provided valuable insight into coordinating group attacks against a single powerful opponent. Ancient sources credit him with developing many of the formation strategies that would prove crucial during the actual hunt. Telamon, brother of Peleus and father of the future Ajax, complemented his sibling's spear-fighting expertise with exceptional skill in close combat and defensive tactics. His massive shield, crafted from layers of bronze and reinforced with divine blessings, could potentially provide protection for other hunters during critical moments of the encounter. The brothers' ability to coordinate their fighting styles created a formidable tactical unit within the larger group. Admetus, king of Phaerae and husband of Alcestis, arrived with a contingent of Thessalian cavalry and hunting hounds, bred specifically for pursuing large game. His contributions included not only personal fighting ability, but also logistical support in the form of supply wagons, medical equipment, and specialized hunting gear that would prove essential during the extended campaign required to locate and engage the supernatural boar. Ancaeus, son of Lycurgus and Prince of Arcadia, brought intimate knowledge of the mountainous terrain and forest environments where the boar was most likely to take refuge. His expertise in tracking and wilderness survival made him invaluable for the scouting and pursuit phases of the hunt, though his impetuous nature would later prove problematic during the actual confrontation with the creature. The arrival of Atalanta at the Calydonian assembly created immediate controversy among the assembled heroes, many of whom had never encountered a female warrior of her caliber and reputation. Her appearance challenged conventional expectations in multiple ways, from her practical hunting attire that emphasized functionality over feminine modesty, to her obvious physical conditioning that rivaled or exceeded that of many male participants. Ancient descriptions emphasize her confident bearing and the quality of her equipment, particularly her silver-tipped arrows and composite bow that marked her as a devotee of Artemis. Several heroes initially objected to Atalanta's participation on grounds that included both practical concerns about group coordination and traditional beliefs about the appropriateness of mixed-gender hunting parties. Ancaeus and several other Arcadian participants argued that the presence of a woman would anger the gods and bring misfortune to the entire expedition. Others worried that the need to protect a female participant would compromise tactical flexibility and increase risks for all involved. Meleager's immediate and vocal support for Atalanta's inclusion reflected both his recognition of her exceptional abilities and his personal attraction to her, though ancient sources disagree about whether romantic interest influenced his decision. His arguments focus primarily on practical considerations, pointing out that her reputation as a huntress exceeded that of many male participants, and that her connection to Artemis might provide divine favour for an expedition seeking to destroy the goddess's own creature. The young prince's willingness to override the objections of older and more experienced heroes demonstrated both courage and potential recklessness that would characterise his leadership throughout the hunt. The tactical planning phase of the expedition revealed the complexity of coordinating such a diverse group of heroes, each accustomed to individual glory and independent action. Meleager's attempts to establish unified command structures met resistance from heroes who considered themselves equal or superior in experience and ability. The presence of multiple kings and princes created additional complications, as questions of precedence and authority threatened to undermine the cooperation necessary for success against a supernatural opponent. Atalanta's contributions to the planning process demonstrated her tactical acumen and deep understanding of hunting strategies, particularly those applicable to dangerous prey and forest environments. Her suggestions regarding approach routes, positioning of participants, and contingency plans for various scenarios reflected both theoretical knowledge and practical experience that impressed even initially skeptical heroes. Her ability to analyze terrain features, predict animal behavior, and coordinate group movements gradually earned respect from participants who had initially dismissed her capabilities. The religious preparations for the hunt involved extensive sacrifices and ritual purifications designed to secure divine favour and protection for the dangerous undertaking ahead. These ceremonies, conducted over several days, included offerings to Artemis herself in hopes of appeasing the goddess's anger, while simultaneously seeking her blessing for the destruction of her own creature. The theological complexity of this situation required careful consultation with experienced priests and seers who could navigate the delicate balance between honouring the goddess and opposing her divine punishment. And Atalanta's role in these religious observances proved particularly significant, as her status as a devoted follower of Artemis provided unique access to the goddess's will and favour. Her participation in the ritual sacrifices and purification ceremonies lent legitimacy to the expedition's religious preparations, while potentially offering protection against divine retribution for their intended actions. Ancient sources suggest that omens observed during these ceremonies indicated Artemis's grudging approval for the hunt, though warnings about potential consequences for the participants remained ominous. The actual tracking of the divine boar required skills that exceeded normal hunting expertise, as the creature's supernatural nature allowed it to move through terrain and conceal itself in ways that defied conventional tracking methods. Its ability to travel vast distances without leaving consistent trail signs frustrated initial attempts at location, while its apparent awareness of being hunted led to deliberate misdirection and false trails that wasted valuable time and resources. Atalanta's exceptional tracking abilities proved crucial during this phase of the expedition, as her bear-derived skills and connection to Artemis allowed her to interpret signs that other hunters missed or misunderstood. Her ability to distinguish between genuine boar sign and deliberate deception gradually led the hunting party toward the creature's actual location, though the process required several days of careful investigation across difficult terrain. The first direct encounter with the boar occurred in a dense oak grove sacred to Artemis, where the creature had established a temporary lair among ancient trees whose massive trunks provided both concealment and defensive positions. The initial sighting confirmed ancient descriptions of the beast's supernatural size and ferocity, with several heroes reportedly stepping backward involuntarily upon witnessing the creature's imposing physical presence and obvious intelligence. The boar's immediate response to the hunter's approach demonstrated tactical awareness that exceeded normal animal behavior, as it positioned itself to maximize the defensive advantages of the terrain while maintaining multiple escape routes. Its initial charges targeted specific individuals rather than random attacks, suggesting ability to assess relative threats and prioritize targets accordingly. The creature's first assault wounded 2 heroes severely enough to remove them from active participation, establishing the serious nature of the threat they faced. Atalanta's performance during this initial engagement distinguished her from virtually all other participants through her combination of courage, skill, and tactical judgment. While several heroes either retreated or became paralyzed by the creature's supernatural presence, she maintained her composure and began systematic analysis of its behavior patterns and potential vulnerabilities. Her calm assessment of the situation and immediate adaptation of hunting strategies to accommodate the boar's unusual capabilities demonstrated the exceptional mental discipline that complemented her physical abilities. The crucial moment that would define Atalanta's role in the hunt occurred when the boar, having scattered the initial attack formation, prepared for a devastating charge that would likely have resulted in multiple casualties among the assembled heroes. Drawing her composite bow with practiced efficiency, Atalanta loosed a silver-tipped arrow that struck the creature behind its left shoulder, penetrating the supposedly impenetrable hide and drawing the first blood of the encounter. This achievement, witnessed by all participants, established her as the hero who had accomplished what none of the famous male warriors had managed. The silver-tipped arrow that had drawn first blood from the Calydonian Boar marked not only Atalanta's triumph in that legendary hunt, but also served as the foundation for a reputation that would transform her from accomplished huntress into one of the most feared athletic competitors in the ancient Greek world. Her success against the divine creature, witnessed by the greatest heroes of her generation, provided irrefutable evidence of abilities that transcended conventional expectations for female warriors. This validation opened doors to formal athletic competitions that had previously remained exclusively male domains, creating opportunities for Atalanta to demonstrate her prowess in structured contests rather than wilderness encounters. The transition from hunting excellence to athletic competition represented a natural progression for someone of Atalanta's capabilities and competitive temperament. Ancient Greek society placed enormous emphasis on physical contests as demonstrations of divine favour, personal virtue, and heroic worthiness. Athletic festivals served not merely as entertainment, but as religious observances where participants honoured the gods while displaying the excellence that justified their elevated social status. For Atalanta, whose unconventional background and rejection of traditional feminine roles had created questions about her place in society, success in formal competition offered validation that even her most determined critics could not dismiss. Wrestling held particular significance within the spectrum of ancient Greek athletics, representing the most direct form of physical competition where individual strength, technique, and determination could be measured without the mediation of weapons or equipment. Unlike boxing, which relied heavily on striking power, or the pankration, which allowed dangerous submission holds, wrestling required competitors to demonstrate superiority through controlled application of leverage, balance, and tactical positioning. Victory in wrestling contests indicated not just physical capability, but also mental discipline and strategic thinking that ancient Greeks considered essential qualities of true heroism. The religious context of wrestling competitions added layers of meaning that extended far beyond simple physical contests. Most major wrestling events occurred during festivals honouring specific deities, with victories interpreted as evidence of divine approval for the winner's character and actions. For female participants like Atalanta, this religious dimension provided crucial legitimacy for their involvement in activities that conventional social norms would otherwise prohibit. Her dedication to Artemis, already established through her hunting achievements, created theological justification for her participation in contests that honoured the goddess's values of physical excellence and competitive determination. Atalanta's first documented wrestling victory occurred at the Heraea, the women's athletic festival held at Olympia in honour of Hera every 4 years. This competition, while less famous than the Olympic Games, attracted female athletes from throughout the Greek world and provided the premier venue for demonstrating women's athletic capabilities. The wrestling events at the Heraea followed rules similar to those governing male competitions, with matches decided by the first competitor to throw her opponent to the ground 3 times or force a submission through superior positioning. The techniques Atalanta employed in wrestling reflected the unique combination of skills derived from her unconventional upbringing and systematic training. Her bear rearing had provided exceptional understanding of leverage and balance, as young bears learned to wrestle as part of their natural development. This foundation, enhanced by human instruction in formal wrestling methods, created a fighting style that opponents found difficult to predict or counter. Ancient sources describe her ability to shift between conventional techniques and improvised moves that drew upon her wilderness experience, keeping adversaries off balance both literally and figuratively. Her physical conditioning, developed through years of hunting and wilderness survival, gave Atalanta significant advantages in wrestling competitions that typically favoured raw strength over endurance. While many opponents possessed superior muscle mass, few could match her cardiovascular fitness and ability to maintain peak performance throughout extended matches. This stamina advantage became particularly pronounced in tournament formats where competitors faced multiple opponents in succession, allowing Atalanta to wear down stronger adversaries through sustained pressure and relentless tactical adjustments. The psychological aspects of Atalanta's wrestling success proved as significant as her physical advantages. Most male competitors had never faced female opponents in serious athletic competition, creating mental uncertainty that she exploited ruthlessly. Their hesitation between applying full strength against a woman and risking defeat by holding back provided openings that Atalanta used to establish dominant positions before her opponents could adapt to the unprecedented situation. This psychological warfare, combined with her legitimate technical skills, created a competitive advantage that extended beyond pure athletic ability. Documentation of Atalanta's wrestling achievements comes primarily from ancient sources that recorded notable victories at major athletic festivals throughout Greece. These accounts, while sometimes embellished with supernatural elements, provide consistent evidence of her success against male opponents who were considered among the finest athletes of their generation. The specificity of details regarding her techniques, the locations of competitions, and the identities of defeated opponents suggests that these records preserve genuine historical information rather than purely mythological invention. The victory over Peleus represents perhaps the most significant of Atalanta's documented wrestling triumphs, both for its immediate impact on her reputation and its long-term consequences for heroic genealogy. Peleus, already established as one of the premier warriors of his generation through his participation in the Argonautic expedition and various military campaigns, possessed wrestling skills that had earned him victories at multiple major festivals. His defeat by Atalanta sent shockwaves throughout the Greek athletic community and established her as a competitor capable of defeating even the most accomplished male athletes. Ancient sources describe the match between Atalanta and Peleus as occurring during the funeral games for King Peleus, an event that attracted competitors from throughout the Greek world due to the substantial prizes offered and the religious significance of honouring the deceased monarch. The wrestling competition featured a tournament format with preliminary rounds leading to championship matches, allowing spectators to observe Atalanta's progression through increasingly difficult opponents before her confrontation with Peleus, in what most observers expected would be the final match. The tactical dynamics of their encounter revealed the sophisticated wrestling techniques that both competitors had developed through years of training and competition. Peleus relied primarily on his superior upper body strength and experience in close-quarters combat, attempting to establish dominant grips that would allow him to control Atalanta's movement and positioning. His strategy focused on preventing her from utilizing her speed and agility advantages by forcing the match into static grappling situations, where his strength could prove decisive. Atalanta's counter-strategy demonstrated her ability to analyze opponents and adapt her approach to exploit specific weaknesses or limitations. Rather than attempting to match Peleus' strength directly, she used her superior flexibility and balance to escape from disadvantageous positions, while creating opportunities to attack his legs and lower body where her leverage advantages could overcome his strength superiority. Her willingness to sacrifice temporary positioning for long-term tactical advantage reflected sophisticated understanding of wrestling strategy that impressed even experienced observers. The decisive moment of their match occurred when Peleus, frustrated by his inability to establish lasting control, attempted an aggressive throw that required him to commit fully to a single technique. Atalanta's recognition of this commitment allowed her to counter with a hip throw that used his own momentum against him, sending the famous hero crashing to the ground with sufficient force to stun him temporarily. Her ability to maintain control during the follow-up grappling secured the victory and established her reputation as a wrestler capable of defeating any opponent regardless of their previous achievements. The cultural significance of Atalanta's victory over Peleus extended far beyond the immediate athletic achievement to influence broader Greek attitudes toward female capabilities and social roles. Peleus' status as a future father of Achilles, the greatest warrior of the Trojan War, meant that his defeat by a woman created genealogical implications that resonated throughout heroic tradition. Ancient audiences understood that the man who would sire the mightiest of Greek heroes had been bested in single combat by a female athlete, challenging conventional assumptions about masculine superiority and female limitations. The religious context of athletic competitions in ancient Greece provided framework for understanding exceptional female achievements, like Atalanta's wrestling victories. Athletic excellence was interpreted as evidence of divine favour, meaning that her success indicated the gods' approval of her unconventional lifestyle and rejection of traditional feminine roles. This theological interpretation offered protection against social criticism while validating her choices in ways that purely secular achievements could not provide. Regional variations in attitudes toward female athletics created different levels of acceptance for Atalanta's competitive activities throughout the Greek world. Sparta, with its emphasis on physical conditioning for both men and women, generally welcomed female athletic achievement as beneficial to the community's military effectiveness. Athenian society, more conservative in its gender expectations, viewed such activities with greater suspicion while still acknowledging their religious legitimacy when conducted within appropriate festival contexts. The training regimens that produced Atalanta's wrestling success required dedication and systematic development that rivaled or exceeded those of male competitors. Ancient sources describe daily practice sessions that included technical instruction, strength conditioning, and tactical analysis that built upon her natural abilities while addressing specific weaknesses or limitations. Her coaches, typically experienced former competitors themselves, recognized her unique combination of attributes and developed training programs that maximized her advantages while minimizing potential vulnerabilities. The physical demands of serious wrestling training created bodily development that ancient Greek society found challenging to categorize within conventional gender expectations. Female athletes like Atalanta developed muscular definition, physical strength, and confident bearing that differed markedly from the soft, protected appearance expected of traditional women. This physical transformation served both practical and symbolic functions, enabling athletic success while visually representing rejection of conventional feminine roles. Nutritional requirements for competitive wrestling necessitated dietary practices that further distinguished female athletes from typical women of their era. The high-protein, carefully regulated eating patterns required for optimal performance demanded resources and attention that conventional domestic roles rarely accommodated. Atalanta's ability to maintain such regimens reflected both her exceptional dedication and the support systems that her athletic success had created within communities that valued her achievements. The psychological preparation required for wrestling competition involved mental conditioning that addressed both technical and emotional challenges unique to female participants. Atalanta needed to develop not only the tactical awareness and competitive aggression necessary for success, but also the psychological resilience to handle social disapproval and gender-based criticism that male athletes rarely encountered. Her ability to maintain focus and determination despite these additional pressures demonstrated mental strength that complemented her physical capabilities. The strategic implications of Atalanta's wrestling victories extended beyond individual achievement to influence broader patterns of competition and social interaction throughout the Greek world. Her success encouraged other exceptional women to pursue athletic careers while simultaneously creating anxiety among male competitors who suddenly faced the possibility of defeat by female opponents. This dynamic tension contributed to evolving attitudes toward gender roles and capabilities that would influence Greek society for generations. The documentation of specific wrestling techniques employed by Atalanta provides insight into the sophisticated understanding of leverage, balance, and tactical positioning that characterized ancient Greek wrestling instruction. Her signature moves, described in various ancient sources, included innovative applications of hip throws, leg sweeps, and submission holds that reflected creative adaptation of conventional techniques to accommodate her physical attributes and strategic preferences. These innovations influenced wrestling instruction throughout the Greek world as coaches sought to understand and counter her methods. The equipment and preparation rituals associated with ancient Greek wrestling created additional challenges for female participants who needed to navigate traditions designed exclusively for male competitors. Atalanta's solutions to these practical problems, including modifications to standard athletic attire and development of gender-appropriate preparation routines, established precedents that later female athletes could follow. Her ability to maintain competitive effectiveness while addressing social expectations demonstrated diplomatic skills that complemented her athletic abilities. The impact of Atalanta's wrestling achievements on potential suitors created a complex dynamic that reinforced her commitment to chastity, while simultaneously attracting increased romantic interest from men who viewed her success as evidence of exceptional worthiness. The very victories that were intended to demonstrate her independence and capability paradoxically increased her desirability among heroes who interpreted athletic excellence as indicating superior breeding potential and divine favour that would benefit their offspring. The psychological effect of witnessing Atalanta's wrestling victories on potential suitors varied significantly based on individual temperament and cultural background. Some men found her success intimidating and chose to pursue more conventional marriage prospects, rather than risk public defeat or association with such an unconventional woman. Others viewed her achievements as challenges to be overcome or prizes to be won, intensifying their pursuit while fundamentally misunderstanding her motivations and commitments. The fame that followed Atalanta's triumph in the Calydonian Boar hunt and her subsequent wrestling victories eventually reached the ears of King Iasus in his mountain stronghold of Arcadia. Reports of a female huntress who had drawn first blood from Artemis's divine boar, who wrestled champions to defeat and whose name was spoken alongside the greatest heroes of the age, could hardly escape the attention of a king whose own daughter had vanished into the wilderness decades earlier. The physical descriptions that accompanied these tales, a young woman of exceptional height and athletic build, with the bearing of nobility despite her unconventional lifestyle, stirred memories that Iasus had long attempted to suppress. The king's initial reaction to these reports reflected the complex emotions surrounding his decision to abandon Atalanta as an infant. Ancient sources describe Iasus as a man tormented by the oracle's prophecy and his response to it, spending years wondering whether his daughter had survived the exposure and what manner of person she might have become. The growing legend of Atalanta forced him to confront the possibility that his abandoned child had not only survived, but achieved a level of fame and accomplishment that surpassed most of his male contemporaries. This realization brought both pride in her achievements and anxiety about the prophetic warnings that had motivated her abandonment. The process of confirming Atalanta's identity required careful investigation through networks of informants and travelling merchants who could provide detailed observations of her appearance, mannerisms, and background. Physical characteristics proved particularly significant, as royal bloodlines often displayed distinctive features that could be recognised across generations. Ancient accounts describe Atalanta as possessing the characteristic height and bone structure of the Arcadian royal family, along with specific facial features that multiple observers compared to King Iasus himself. Her bearing and natural authority, evident even in wilderness settings, suggested noble breeding that transcended her unconventional upbringing. Additional confirmation came through investigation of her origins and early history, though the details remained fragmentary due to her unusual childhood experiences. The hunters who had discovered and raised her provided crucial testimony about the location and circumstances of her rescue, details that aligned with Iasus's memories of where and when he had exposed his infant daughter. The timeline of her development, her approximate age, and her connection to the specific region of Mount Parthenion all supported the conclusion that this legendary huntress was indeed the abandoned princess of Arcadia. The decision to formally acknowledge Atalanta as his daughter and heir required King Iasus to navigate complex political and religious considerations that extended far beyond personal emotions. The original oracle's prophecy remained a factor in his calculations, as did the practical implications of recognizing an adult daughter, whose lifestyle and commitments differed dramatically from conventional royal expectations. Her vow of chastity to Artemis, her rejection of traditional feminine roles, and her established independence created unprecedented challenges for succession planning and diplomatic relationships with neighbouring kingdoms. Political pressures from the Arcadian nobility influenced Iasus's approach to the reunion, as various court factions held different opinions about the wisdom of acknowledging such an unconventional heir. Conservative nobles argued that Atalanta's lifestyle made her unsuitable for royal responsibilities, and that her recognition would set dangerous precedents for female behaviour throughout the kingdom. Progressive elements within the court countered that her fame and achievements reflected positively on Arcadian royal bloodlines, while her connection to Artemis provided divine legitimacy for her unusual characteristics. The formal reunion between Atalanta and King Iasus occurred at the royal palace in Tegea during the autumn season, arranged through intermediaries who had spent months negotiating the terms and conditions of their meeting. Ancient sources describe the encounter as emotionally charged but diplomatically careful, with both father and daughter maintaining formal courtesy, while assessing each other's character and motivations. Atalanta's initial wariness reflected her independence and uncertainty about royal obligations, while Iasus struggled to reconcile his memories of the infant he had abandoned with the accomplished woman who stood before him. The physical evidence of Atalanta's royal heritage became undeniable during their face-to-face meeting, as court observers noted striking resemblances in facial structure, body proportions, and mannerisms that could not be explained by coincidence. Her natural dignity and confident bearing in formal settings demonstrated breeding that her wilderness upbringing had not eliminated, while her intelligent responses to complex political questions revealed mental capabilities that matched her physical achievements. These observations convinced even sceptical nobles that she was indeed Iasus's daughter. Though questions about her suitability as heir remained contentious, the tension between Atalanta's established independence and the expectations placed upon royal daughters created immediate conflicts that would define their relationship throughout the reunion period. Her commitment to Artemis and her vow of chastity directly contradicted the primary function expected of princesses in ancient Greek society, forming marriage alliances that strengthened political relationships and produced legitimate heirs to continue royal bloodlines. This fundamental incompatibility created a standoff where neither father nor daughter could fully accept the other's position without abandoning core principles. Atalanta's perspective on royal recognition reflected her years of self-reliance and her dedication to values that prioritized personal excellence over social conformity. She viewed her father's acknowledgement as validation of her achievements rather than an obligation to conform to conventional expectations. Her willingness to accept the title and privileges of royal status came with explicit conditions regarding her continued independence and her right to maintain her existing commitments to Artemis. These demands challenged traditional concepts of paternal authority and filial obedience that formed the foundation of ancient Greek family structures. King Iasus's position reflected the practical realities of royal governance and the political necessities that shaped dynastic planning throughout the ancient world. His recognition of Atalanta as his heir created diplomatic opportunities and challenges that required careful management to maintain Arcadia's relationships with neighbouring kingdoms. The unique situation of having a famous female heir opened possibilities for marriage alliances that could bring significant advantages, but only if Atalanta could be persuaded to abandon her vow of chastity and accept conventional royal responsibilities. The court's reaction to Atalanta's presence revealed the deep cultural tensions surrounding gender roles and social expectations in ancient Greek aristocratic society. Older nobles, particularly those who had served under previous kings, found her behaviour and attitudes deeply troubling as violations of natural order and divine mandate. Younger courtiers, influenced by growing awareness of exceptional women in other Greek cities, showed greater acceptance of her unconventional characteristics, while still expecting eventual conformity to traditional roles. The religious implications of Atalanta's royal recognition created additional complications that required consultation with priests and oracles throughout Arcadia. Her status as a devoted follower of Artemis provided divine legitimacy for her unusual lifestyle, but it also raised questions about the compatibility of her religious commitments with royal obligations. The original prophecy that had motivated her abandonment remained a concern for those who interpreted her return as potentially fulfilling the predicted doom, though others argued that her achievements demonstrated divine favour that contradicted the earlier warnings. The practical challenges of integrating Atalanta into royal administration reveal the extent to which ancient Greek governmental structures assumed male leadership and conventional family arrangements. Her lack of experience with diplomatic protocols, financial management, and legal procedures created immediate obstacles that required extensive education and training. Simultaneously, her unconventional background provided unique perspectives on military strategy, wilderness management, and popular sentiment that proved valuable for addressing challenges that traditional royal education rarely addressed. The question of succession planning became the most contentious issue surrounding Atalanta's royal recognition, as her vow of chastity eliminated the possibility of producing legitimate heirs through conventional marriage. This situation created a dynastic crisis that threatened the long-term stability of the Arcadian royal line, while providing opportunities for ambitious nobles to position themselves as alternative successors. King Iasus's insistence on finding solutions to this problem reflected both paternal concern and political necessity that made compromise increasingly difficult. Marriage negotiations emerged as the primary battleground between Atalanta's commitment to independence and her father's political requirements. Ancient Greek royal marriages served multiple functions beyond personal relationships, including territorial agreements, military alliances, and economic partnerships that could determine a kingdom's prosperity and security for generations. The potential advantages of marrying such a famous and accomplished princess attracted suitors from throughout the Greek world, creating opportunities for advantageous alliances that Iasus was reluctant to abandon. The political motivations behind arranged marriages in ancient Greek royal families reflected the complex web of relationships that maintained stability and prevented warfare between neighbouring kingdoms. Marriage alliances created obligations of mutual support that could prove crucial during military conflicts, natural disasters, or succession disputes. The exchange of royal women between kingdoms also facilitated cultural transmission, technological innovation, and economic cooperation that benefited all parties involved. These practical considerations made marriage negotiations essential tools of statecraft rather than simple personal arrangements. Economic factors played equally significant roles in royal marriage planning, as dowries, bride prices, and territorial exchanges associated with these unions could dramatically alter a kingdom's wealth and resources. The unique situation of Atalanta's fame and accomplishments created unprecedented opportunities for advantageous negotiations, as potential suitors offered extraordinary compensation for the privilege of marrying such an exceptional princess. These economic incentives provided additional motivation for King Iasus to pursue marriage arrangements despite his daughter's obvious reluctance. Military considerations influenced royal marriage strategies throughout the ancient Greek world, as alliances formed through matrimonial bonds could provide crucial support during conflicts with aggressive neighbours or internal rebellions. Arcadia's mountainous geography provided natural defensive advantages, but the kingdom's relatively small population and limited resources made external alliances essential for long-term security. Atalanta's marriage to a powerful foreign prince could bring military support that would significantly enhance Arcadian defensive capabilities while potentially providing opportunities for territorial expansion. The diplomatic protocols surrounding royal marriage negotiations required extensive preliminary discussions that could continue for months or years before reaching formal agreements. These negotiations involved not only the immediate families but also advisory councils, religious authorities, and military commanders, who assessed the strategic implications of proposed alliances. The complexity of these arrangements meant that royal marriages rarely reflected personal preferences. instead serving broader political objectives that prioritize dynastic and national interests over individual desires. Cultural exchange through royal marriages created opportunities for technological innovation, artistic development, and intellectual advancement that could transform entire kingdoms over time. Princess brides typically brought with them craftsmen, scholars, and cultural practices from their home regions, introducing new techniques and perspectives that enriched their adopted communities. The potential for Atalanta to serve as a conduit for such exchanges made her marriage particularly attractive to kingdoms seeking to enhance their cultural sophistication and technological capabilities. The religious dimensions of royal marriages involved complex ceremonial requirements and divine sanctions that legitimized political alliances while invoking supernatural protection for the new relationships. These sacred aspects of matrimonial unions made them difficult to dissolve or modify once completed, creating permanent bonds that transcended the lives of the original participants. The involvement of various deities in blessing these arrangements meant that violating marriage agreements could provoke divine retribution that threatened entire kingdoms rather than just individual families. Atalanta's resistance to marriage proposals reflected not only her personal vow of chastity, but also her understanding of how conventional royal marriages would fundamentally alter her identity and capabilities. The domestic responsibilities expected of royal wives in ancient Greek society would eliminate her opportunities for hunting, athletic competition, and the wilderness adventures that had defined her existence. The physical demands of pregnancy and child-rearing would compromise the athletic conditioning that enabled her exceptional performance, while the social expectations of maternal behaviour would conflict with the aggressive competitiveness that characterised her personality. The growing pressure from King Iasus for Atalanta to consider marriage proposals created escalating tension that threatened to destroy their recently established relationship. His arguments focused on dynastic necessity, political advantage, and social obligation, while her responses emphasized personal autonomy, religious commitment, and individual achievement. The fundamental incompatibility of their positions made compromise increasingly difficult as external pressures from potential suitors and political advisors intensified the urgency of reaching resolution. The arrival of formal marriage proposals from various Greek kingdoms transformed the abstract discussion of Atalanta's marital future into concrete negotiations with specific terms and conditions. These proposals revealed the extent of her fame throughout the ancient world, as princes from regions as distant as Thrace and Crete sought alliances with the legendary huntress. The diversity and quality of these offers demonstrated that her unconventional lifestyle had enhanced rather than diminished her value as a potential bride, creating opportunities for advantageous alliances that few princesses could command. The mounting pressure from King Iasus regarding marriage proposals eventually forced Atalanta to devise a solution that would satisfy her father's political needs, while preserving her commitment to Artemis and her vow of chastity. Drawing upon her reputation as the fastest runner in the Greek world, she proposed a challenge that appeared to offer potential suitors a fair opportunity for her hand, while creating conditions that would virtually guarantee her continued freedom. Any man who wished to marry her would be required to defeat her in a footrace, with victory earning him both her hand and a place in the Arcadian royal succession. Failure, however, would result in immediate execution, a penalty severe enough to discourage all but the most determined or foolhardy suitors. The terms of this racing challenge reflected Atalanta's sophisticated understanding of both athletic competition and human psychology. Her speed had become legendary throughout Greece, with witnesses to her performances describing running abilities that seemed to transcend normal human limitations. Ancient sources record instances where she outpaced trained horses over short distances and maintained speeds that left experienced messengers exhausted after brief pursuits. These documented achievements created a reputation that made victory against her appear virtually impossible. serving as an effective deterrent to casual suitors while preserving the theoretical possibility that divine intervention might produce a worthy opponent. The execution penalty for defeated suitors served multiple strategic purposes beyond simple deterrence. This extreme consequence demonstrated the seriousness of the challenge while appealing to King Iasus's desire for a selection process that would identify only the most exceptional candidates. The death penalty also satisfied Atalanta's need to discourage frivolous attempts while maintaining the appearance of offering genuine opportunity for marriage. Ancient Greek society accepted such extreme stakes in heroic competitions, viewing them as appropriate tests of divine favour and personal worthiness that separated true heroes from mere pretenders. The specific format of the racing challenge incorporated elements designed to maximise Atalanta's advantages while creating the appearance of fair competition. The course would cover a distance of approximately 2 stadia, roughly 400 metres, over varied terrain that included both flat sections and areas requiring technical skill in navigating obstacles. Atalanta would begin the race carrying her hunting spear and wearing her standard athletic attire, while suitors could choose their own equipment and clothing within reasonable limits. The finish line would be marked by a sacred altar to Artemis, symbolically reinforcing the religious context of the competition and Atalanta's divine protection. The rules governing the race allowed for certain tactical elements that experienced competitors might exploit, though Atalanta's superior speed made such strategies largely theoretical. Suitors were permitted to carry objects that might serve as distractions or obstacles, provided these items did not constitute weapons that could cause injury. This provision reflected ancient Greek athletic traditions that valued cleverness and tactical thinking alongside pure physical ability, creating opportunities for innovative approaches that might overcome raw speed through superior strategy. However, the practical application of such tactics against an opponent of Atalanta's calibre required both exceptional creativity and precise execution that few mortals could achieve. News of Atalanta's racing challenge spread rapidly throughout the Greek world, carried by merchants, travelling bards, and diplomatic messengers who recognised the unprecedented nature of this matrimonial contest. The combination of her legendary beauty, exceptional accomplishments, and royal status created a prize that attracted attention from the most ambitious and confident young men of the heroic age. Simultaneously, the deadly consequences of failure and her reputation for unmatched speed created a selection pressure that eliminated all but the most determined or divinely inspired candidates. The first suitors to attempt the challenge represented a cross-section of Greek heroic society, ranging from minor princes seeking to elevate their status through marriage to established warriors confident in their own abilities. These initial contestants provided crucial data about Atalanta's racing capabilities while serving as dramatic examples of the challenge's deadly seriousness. Ancient accounts describe races where she finished so far ahead of her opponents that spectators could barely see both runners simultaneously, with defeated suitors collapsing from exhaustion before reaching the execution site. The psychological impact of witnessing these early defeats created a complex dynamic that both discouraged potential suitors and enhanced Atalanta's reputation for supernatural speed. Each failed attempt demonstrated the futility of competing against her through conventional means, while the public executions that followed reinforced the deadly consequences of overconfidence. This pattern established a narrative that would prove crucial for understanding later developments, as potential suitors began seeking alternative approaches that might overcome her advantages through divine assistance or innovative tactics. Among the various young men who observed these early contests was Hippomenes, a prince of Boeotia, whose genealogy traced back through multiple generations of distinguished rulers and heroes. Ancient sources provide varying accounts of his exact parentage, with some traditions identifying his father as Megarius of Onchestus, while others suggest descent from Poseidon through earlier Boeotian royal lines. Regardless of the specific genealogical details, all accounts agree that Hippomenes possessed the noble breeding, physical conditioning, and heroic ambitions that characterized the elite young men of his generation. Hippomenes differed from previous suitors in several crucial respects that would prove significant for the ultimate resolution of Atalanta's challenge. His initial approach to the competition reflected careful observation and analysis rather than simple confidence in his own abilities. Where earlier contestants had relied primarily on their reputation for speed or their general athletic prowess, Hippomenes spent considerable time studying Atalanta's racing technique, analysing the course conditions, and developing strategic approaches that might exploit any possible weaknesses in her otherwise overwhelming advantages. The young prince's motivation for pursuing Atalanta extended beyond the political and economic benefits that attracted most royal suitors. Ancient sources describe his genuine admiration for her accomplishments and his fascination with her unique position in Greek society as a woman who had achieved heroic status through personal merit rather than family connections. This intellectual attraction complemented the physical desire that her legendary beauty inspired, creating a combination of motivations that distinguished his pursuit from the more conventional approaches of previous contestants. Hippomenes' background in Boeotian court culture provided him with sophisticated understanding of diplomatic strategy and political maneuvering that proved relevant to his courtship approach. Boeotian society placed particular emphasis on intellectual achievement and tactical innovation, values that encouraged creative problem-solving and unconventional approaches to challenging situations. This cultural foundation prepared him to consider alternatives that might not occur to suitors from regions that prioritized direct confrontation and overwhelming force over subtlety and strategic thinking. The physical capabilities that qualified Hippomenes as a legitimate contender in Atalanta's racing challenge reflected years of systematic training in various athletic disciplines. Ancient accounts describe him as possessing the lean, muscular build typical of serious runners, with particular development in the leg muscles and cardiovascular system necessary for sustained high-speed performance. His training regimen included not only running practice over various distances and terrain types, but also strength conditioning, flexibility work, and tactical exercises that prepared him for competitive situations requiring both physical and mental excellence. His racing technique demonstrated sophisticated understanding of biomechanics and strategic pacing that distinguished him from less experienced competitors. Where many suitors attempted to match Atalanta's initial acceleration and quickly exhausted themselves, Hippomenes developed a more measured approach that conserved energy for crucial moments while maintaining competitive positioning throughout the race. This tactical sophistication reflected both natural athletic intelligence and careful study of successful racing strategies employed by champion athletes throughout the Greek world. The decision to seek divine assistance in his pursuit of Atalanta represented a crucial turning point that transformed Hippomenes from merely another ambitious suitor into the central figure in a drama involving direct Olympian intervention. His recognition that conventional athletic preparation would prove insufficient against Atalanta's supernatural speed led him to explore religious approaches that might provide the additional advantages necessary for success. This strategic thinking demonstrated both humility about his own limitations and sophisticated understanding of how divine favour operated within the context of heroic competition. Aphrodite's decision to intervene on Hippomenes' behalf reflected the goddess's complex motivations regarding love, marriage, and the proper ordering of human relationships. Ancient sources suggest that the goddess of love had grown increasingly concerned about Atalanta's rejection of marriage and romantic relationships, viewing her vow of chastity as a challenge to Aphrodite's fundamental sphere of influence. The sight of a beautiful and accomplished young woman deliberately avoiding the romantic entanglements that gave meaning to human existence provoked the goddess to take direct action to restore what she considered the natural order of relationships between men and women. The goddess's specific interest in Hippomenes as her chosen instrument reflected her assessment of his character, motivations, and potential for success in winning Atalanta's affections. Unlike previous suitors who had approached the racing challenge primarily as a means of acquiring political advantage or social status, Hippomenes demonstrated genuine appreciation for Atalanta's exceptional qualities and sincere desire for a relationship based on mutual respect and admiration. This authentic romantic interest aligned with Aphrodite's preferences for promoting love matches that transcended purely practical considerations. Aphrodite's method of providing assistance involved supplying Hippomenes with 3 golden apples obtained from the garden of the Hesperides, magical fruits that possessed irresistible appeal to anyone who observed them. These apples represented some of the most precious objects in the divine realm, created by the gods themselves and imbued with power that transcended normal physical laws. Their golden colour reflected not mere surface decoration, but intrinsic divine essence that made them impossible to ignore when revealed at appropriate moments during competition. The Garden of the Hesperides, source of these magical apples, occupied a unique position in Greek cosmology as the western boundary of the known world, where divine and mortal realms intersected. This garden, tended by the nymph daughters of Atlas and guarded by the dragon Ladon, contained trees bearing golden fruit that granted various supernatural benefits to those worthy of consuming them. The apples that Aphrodite provided to Hippomenes came from these sacred trees, carrying with them the accumulated divine power of their otherworldly origin and the blessing of the goddess herself. The symbolic significance of golden apples in Greek religious tradition extended far beyond their practical utility as racing distractions. Gold represented incorruption, divine perfection, and eternal value that transcended temporal concerns, while apples symbolized knowledge, temptation, and the fundamental choices that defined human existence. The combination of these symbolic elements in the magical fruit created objects that operated simultaneously on physical and metaphysical levels, affecting both immediate behaviour and deeper psychological responses in those who encountered them. The specific properties of the Hesperidian apples made them ideal tools for Aphrodite's intervention in the racing contest. Their supernatural beauty created an irresistible compulsion to possess them that could override even the strongest determination and most focused concentration. Ancient sources describe their appearance as surpassing any earthly gold in brilliance and perfection, with a luminous quality that seemed to emanate from within the fruit itself. This divine radiance made them impossible to ignore when revealed, creating momentary distraction that could prove decisive in a closely contested race. The strategic use of these magical apples required careful timing and positioning that would maximize their effectiveness while maintaining the appearance of fair competition. Hippomenes needed to deploy them at moments when Atalanta's natural speed advantage would be most vulnerable to disruption, creating opportunities for him to gain crucial ground while she recovered from the distraction. The challenge lay in predicting her likely responses and positioning himself to exploit the temporary advantages that the divine intervention would provide. The psychological impact of the golden apples operated on multiple levels that reflected their divine origin and symbolic significance. Their immediate effect created overwhelming desire for possession that temporarily overrode all other considerations, including the urgent need to maintain racing pace and competitive focus. This compulsion reflected Aphrodite's power over desire and attraction, demonstrating how divine influence could manipulate human behavior through the fundamental drives that motivated mortal actions. The deeper psychological effect involved awakening Atalanta's suppressed feminine nature and her unconscious desire for beautiful objects that her masculine lifestyle had forced her to deny. The theological implications of Aphrodite's intervention raised complex questions about divine justice, fair competition, and the proper relationship between gods and mortals in heroic contests. Traditional Greek religious thought accepted divine assistance in human endeavours as evidence of worthiness and proper relationship with the supernatural realm, but the specific circumstances of this intervention created ambiguity about whether Hippomenes' victory would represent legitimate achievement or divine manipulation. This theological complexity added layers of meaning to the contest that extended beyond simple athletic competition to encompass fundamental questions about fate, free will, and divine involvement in human affairs. The preparation phase for Hippomenes' attempt at the racing challenge involved not only physical conditioning and tactical planning, but also religious observances designed to maintain divine favour and ensure successful deployment of Aphrodite's gifts. These preparations included sacrifices to various deities, purification rituals that prepared him for contact with sacred objects, and consultations with experienced priests who could provide guidance on managing divine intervention within competitive contexts. The complexity of these preparations reflected the seriousness of his undertaking and the unprecedented nature of competing with divine assistance against a divinely protected opponent. The anticipation surrounding Hippomenes' racing attempt created unprecedented interest throughout the Greek world, as news of his divine sponsorship and the magical nature of his strategy spread through networks of travellers and correspondents. The prospect of witnessing a contest between Artemis's protected huntress and Aphrodite's chosen champion attracted observers from distant regions who recognized the historical significance of this confrontation between competing divine influences. The gathering crowd included not only casual spectators, but also religious authorities, athletic experts, and political figures who understood the broader implications of the contest's outcome. The morning of the race dawned clear and still, with atmospheric conditions that favoured fast times and optimal visibility for the assembled spectators. The course had been carefully prepared according to traditional standards, with markers indicating the starting line, turning points, and finish area clearly visible to all participants and observers. Atalanta appeared in her customary racing attire, carrying her ceremonial spear and displaying the confident bearing that had characterized her approach to previous contests. Her physical condition appeared optimal, with the lean musculature and alert demeanour that indicated peak athletic readiness for the challenge ahead. Hippomenes presented a striking contrast in his approach to the starting line, carrying a small leather pouch that contained the golden apples while maintaining the focused concentration that serious competitors displayed before crucial contests. His physical appearance reflected months of intensive preparation, with the conditioning and mental preparation necessary for competing at the highest levels of athletic performance. The knowledge of his divine assistance created additional psychological pressure, as he understood that failure would represent not only personal defeat, but also disappointment of the goddess who had chosen to support his efforts. The positioning at the starting line revealed the tactical considerations that would define the most consequential footrace in Greek legendary history. Atalanta took her customary stance on the inside lane, her left foot forward and her weight balanced on the balls of her feet in the manner that had become her signature racing posture. Her breathing remained controlled and rhythmic, showing no signs of the nervousness that typically affected even experienced competitors before crucial contests. The ceremonial spear in her right hand served both as a religious symbol of her dedication to Artemis and as a practical counterbalance that enhanced her running efficiency through coordinated arm movement. Hippomenes positioned himself in the outer lane, a strategic choice that would provide him with better visibility of Atalanta's movements, while creating optimal angles for deploying the golden apples at crucial moments. His stance differed subtly from conventional racing positions, with his weight shifted slightly backward to enable quicker transitions between running and throwing motions. The leather pouch containing Aphrodite's gifts hung securely at his left hip, positioned for rapid access without interfering with his natural running stride. His facial expression maintained the focused intensity that characterized elite athletes, but careful observers noted a slight tension around his eyes that suggested awareness of the unprecedented nature of his tactical approach. The starting signal, given by King Iasus himself, using a bronze trumpet that had served Arcadian royalty for generations, initiated a sequence of movements that would be analysed and debated by athletic enthusiasts for centuries afterward. At Atalanta's initial acceleration demonstrated the explosive power that had made her legendary, with her first 3 strides covering ground that most runners required 5 or 6 steps to traverse. Her technique remained flawless despite the pressure of the moment, with each foot placement optimised for maximum forward propulsion and minimal energy waste. Hippomenes' start proved surprisingly competitive, as his months of specialised training had developed the specific muscle groups and neural pathways necessary for rapid acceleration. His stride length, while shorter than Atalanta's, maintained higher frequency that kept him within reasonable distance during the crucial opening phase of the race. The tactical wisdom of his approach became apparent as he avoided the common mistake of attempting to match her initial pace, instead settling into a rhythm that he could sustain while remaining close enough to deploy his divine assistance when opportunities arose. The first 100 metres of the course crossed relatively flat terrain that favoured pure speed over tactical manoeuvring, allowing both runners to establish their natural racing rhythms without significant interference from course conditions. Atalanta's lead expanded steadily but not dramatically, reaching approximately 3 metres by the time they approached the first gentle curve that would test their technical skills and strategic thinking. Her form remained mechanically perfect, with the efficient arm swing and controlled breathing that indicated she was running well within her capabilities while maintaining reserves for later tactical adjustments. The moment for Hippomenes' first strategic intervention arrived as they entered the curve, where Atalanta's attention would be momentarily focused on maintaining optimal racing line and managing the centrifugal forces that could disrupt her rhythm. His right hand moved smoothly to the leather pouch, extracting the first golden apple with practiced efficiency, while maintaining his running form through muscle memory developed during countless training repetitions. The timing of this movement reflected careful calculation, as premature deployment would waste the apple's effect while delayed action might allow Atalanta to build an insurmountable lead. The golden apple's release occurred at the precise moment when Atalanta's peripheral vision would detect the movement without her conscious mind immediately processing its significance. Hippomenes' throwing technique, refined through months of practice with weighted objects, sent the divine fruit in a high arc that would land approximately 20 metres ahead and slightly to the right of the racing line. The apple's supernatural radiance became fully apparent as it sailed through the morning air, creating a brilliant golden streak that seemed to pulse within a light and draw the attention of every observer within sight. And Atalanta's reaction to the golden apple's appearance demonstrated the irresistible power of Aphrodite's gift, while simultaneously revealing the internal conflict between her conscious will and her unconscious desires. Her eyes tracked the apple's flight path automatically, despite her rational mind's recognition that any distraction could prove fatal to her racing strategy. The divine compulsion created by the Hesperidean fruit operated below the level of conscious thought, triggering responses that bypassed her normal decision-making processes and activated deeper psychological drives that her masculine lifestyle had suppressed but not eliminated. The physical manifestation of this internal conflict appeared as a subtle break in her running rhythm, with her left foot landing slightly offline and her arm swing becoming momentarily uncoordinated. This disruption lasted no more than 2 strides, but the cumulative effect reduced her forward momentum enough to allow Hippomenes to close the gap by nearly a full metre. Her recovery demonstrated the exceptional athletic conditioning that had made her legendary, as she quickly re-established proper form and began rebuilding her lead through increased pace that would have exhausted lesser competitors. The psychological impact of the first apple's effect created complex emotional responses that influenced Atalanta's approach to the remainder of the race. Her rational mind understood that she had been momentarily distracted by an object that posed no direct threat to her safety or racing objectives, yet the intensity of her desire for the golden fruit surprised and disturbed her. The recognition that her opponent possessed items capable of disrupting her legendary focus created tactical uncertainties that forced her to divide her attention between maintaining optimal racing performance and anticipating future distractions. Hippomenes exploited the temporary advantage gained from the first apple by increasing his pace beyond his previously sustainable rhythm, understanding that the divine intervention had created a window of opportunity that might not recur. His acceleration brought him to within 2 meters of Atalanta's position, close enough to observe subtle changes in her running form and breathing pattern that indicated the psychological pressure was affecting her performance. The knowledge that his strategy was working provided additional motivation that enabled him to maintain the increased pace despite the growing physical demands. The second phase of the race covered more challenging terrain that included a gradual uphill section where superior conditioning and tactical positioning could overcome pure speed advantages. Atalanta's mountain-bred physiology gave her natural advantages in hill running, as her cardiovascular system had adapted to the reduced oxygen levels and increased demands of high-altitude training. Her stride length shortened appropriately for the incline while her cadence increased to maintain forward momentum, demonstrating the technical expertise that complemented her natural athletic gifts. The tactical situation as they crested the hill presented Hippomenes with his second opportunity for divine intervention, as the transition from uphill to level running created a natural breaking point where Atalanta might be vulnerable to distraction. His analysis of her running pattern had revealed that she typically experienced a brief moment of rhythm adjustment during terrain transitions, creating windows where external stimuli might have maximum disruptive effect. The timing of his second apple deployment reflected this understanding, with the golden fruit released just as Atalanta began adjusting her stride for the changed ground conditions. The second golden apple followed a different trajectory than its predecessor, landing closer to the racing line and rolling in a direction that would require Atalanta to deviate significantly from her optimal path to retrieve it. This tactical variation demonstrated Hippomenes' sophisticated understanding of how the divine gifts operated, as he recognized that predictable patterns would allow Atalanta to develop countermeasures that might reduce their effectiveness. The apple's placement also reflected his growing confidence in the strategy, as he positioned it where its psychological impact would be maximized regardless of whether she chose to pursue it. Atalanta's response to the second apple revealed the increasing intensity of the divine compulsion as the race progressed and her physical and mental reserves became depleted. The combination of sustained high-speed running and psychological pressure from the unexpected distractions had begun to erode the mental discipline that normally allowed her to maintain perfect focus during competitive situations. Her deviation from the racing line to approach the second apple covered nearly 5 meters of additional distance, while disrupting her rhythm more severely than the previous distraction had achieved. The time lost in pursuing the second golden apple allowed Hippomenes to achieve rough parity in their positions, running alongside rather than behind the legendary huntress for the first time since the race began. This dramatic shift in their relative positions created visible excitement among the spectators, while generating additional psychological pressure for both competitors. Atalanta's expression showed the strain of maintaining her pace while processing the unprecedented situation of having a legitimate challenger matching her performance in a contest she had expected to dominate easily. The parallel running phase of the race provided unique insights into the contrasting styles and capabilities of both competitors under maximum stress. Atalanta's form remained technically superior, with more efficient energy utilization and better biomechanical optimization of her movement patterns. However, the cumulative effects of the golden apple's psychological impact had introduced subtle tensions in her running posture that reduced her overall efficiency. Her breathing showed signs of increased effort, not from physical exhaustion but from the mental energy required to resist the continuing compulsion to pursue the divine fruits. Hippomenes' performance during this phase demonstrated the effectiveness of his specialized training regimen and the additional motivation provided by divine support. His running form, while less naturally gifted than Atalanta's, maintained remarkable consistency under pressure and showed no signs of the deterioration that typically affected competitors when racing beyond their normal capabilities. The knowledge that his strategy was succeeding provided psychological advantages that translated into improved physical performance, creating a positive feedback loop that enhanced his chances of ultimate victory. The final third of the racecourse included the most technically demanding section, with a sharp descent followed by a series of natural obstacles that required precise foot placement and tactical decision-making while maintaining maximum speed. This terrain had been specifically chosen to test competitors' complete athletic abilities, rather than rewarding pure speed alone. Atalanta's extensive experience with wilderness running gave her natural advantages in navigating such challenges, as her bear-derived training had developed exceptional balance and spatial awareness that proved crucial in technical terrain. The approach to the final descent presented Hippomenes with his last opportunity to deploy divine intervention before the race's conclusion would be determined by pure athletic ability and tactical positioning. His analysis of the course and Atalanta's likely responses suggested that the optimal moment for the third apple would come just before the most technical section, where the combination of speed, gravity, and required precision would make her most vulnerable to distraction. The success of this final intervention would determine whether his divine assistance could overcome her superior natural abilities and wilderness-honed instincts. The third Golden Apple's deployment represented the culmination of Hippomenes' strategic planning and Aphrodite's divine intervention in mortal affairs. His release technique incorporated lessons learned from the previous two throws, with trajectory and timing calculated to maximize psychological impact, while accounting for Atalanta's demonstrated ability to recover quickly from distractions. The apple's path took it directly across her field of vision before landing in a position that would require significant deviation from her racing line to retrieve, creating the most challenging decision point of the entire contest. Atalanta's reaction to the final golden apple revealed the full extent of Aphrodite's power over mortal desires and the tragic conflict between divine compulsion and personal will that defined many Greek heroic narratives. The cumulative effect of the three supernatural fruits had gradually overwhelmed her conscious resistance to their appeal, while the physical and mental demands of the race had depleted the reserves of self-control that might have enabled her to resist completely. Her pursuit of the third apple involved a more dramatic deviation from her racing path, covering additional distance that would prove impossible to recover, despite her superior speed. The question of whether Atalanta deliberately chose to lose the race, or was genuinely overcome by divine compulsion, remains one of the most debated aspects of this legendary contest. Ancient sources provide evidence supporting both interpretations, with some emphasizing the irresistible power of Aphrodite's gifts, while others suggest that Atalanta's growing attraction to Hippomenes influenced her subconscious responses to the golden apples. The complexity of her motivations reflects the sophisticated psychological understanding that characterized the best Greek mythological narratives, which recognized that human behavior often resulted from multiple competing influences rather than single decisive factors. The artistic evidence from ancient pottery, frescoes, and sculptural reliefs provides additional perspective on how different periods and regions interpreted the dynamics of this famous race. Early archaic representations typically depicted Atalanta as clearly ahead throughout most of the contest, with Hippomenes shown in desperate pursuit while deploying the golden apples as obvious acts of divine intervention. These images emphasize the supernatural aspects of the story, while portraying Atalanta as the victim of divine manipulation rather than a willing participant in her own defeat. Classical period artistic interpretations showed greater ambiguity in their portrayal of Atalanta's responses to the golden apples, with her facial expressions and body language suggesting internal conflict rather than simple compulsion. These more sophisticated representations reflected evolving Greek attitudes toward female agency and the complex relationship between divine will and human choice. The artists of this period seem more interested in exploring the psychological dimensions of the story than in simply illustrating the supernatural elements of divine intervention. Hellenistic artistic treatments of the race often emphasize the erotic undertones of the contest, with Atalanta's pursuit of the golden apples portrayed as awakening suppressed feminine desires rather than representing external magical compulsion. These interpretations reflected the period's increased interest in romantic themes and psychological complexity, suggesting that later audiences viewed the story primarily as a tale of love conquering artificial barriers rather than divine manipulation overcoming human will. The final sprint to the finish line demonstrated both competitors' extraordinary athletic abilities under maximum pressure, while revealing the decisive impact of Hippomenes' tactical strategy. Despite losing significant ground in pursuing the third golden apple, Atalanta's recovery attempt showcased the legendary speed that had made her famous throughout the Greek world. Her final acceleration covered the remaining distance at a pace that spectators described as barely visible, with her feet seeming to barely touch the ground as she flew toward the altar of Artemis that marked the finish line. Hippomenes' response to Atalanta's final surge required him to access physical and mental reserves that exceeded his normal capabilities, drawing upon the divine favour that Aphrodite had provided, along with the golden apples. His finishing kick demonstrated that months of specialised training had indeed prepared him to compete at the highest levels of athletic performance, while the psychological advantage of his successful strategy provided additional motivation that enabled superhuman effort. The final meters of the race saw both competitors running at speeds that approached the theoretical limits of human athletic performance. The finish of the race occurred with such narrow margins that initial observers disagreed about the winner, requiring official judgment from King Iasus and his appointed race officials. Hippomenes crossed the finish line approximately half a stride ahead of Atalanta, a margin that represented perhaps 0.2 of a second in modern timing terms. This incredibly close finish validated both competitors' exceptional abilities, while confirming that divine intervention had indeed provided the decisive advantage necessary to overcome Atalanta's natural superiority in running speed. The immediate aftermath of the race revealed the complex emotions and reactions that this unprecedented contest had generated among all participants and observers. Atalanta's initial response combined physical exhaustion with psychological confusion about her own behaviour during the race, as she struggled to understand why she had repeatedly abandoned optimal racing strategy to pursue objects that served no practical purpose. Her legendary composure had been shattered by the combination of unexpected defeat and the recognition that her legendary invincibility had been overcome through means she had not anticipated or prepared for. Hippomenes' victory celebration remained subdued despite achieving his ultimate objective, as he recognized that his success depended heavily on divine assistance rather than purely personal achievement. The knowledge that Aphrodite's intervention had provided the crucial advantage created complex feelings about the legitimacy of his victory and the nature of his relationship with Atalanta going forward. His understanding of the golden apple's psychological impact raised questions about whether her apparent attraction to him resulted from genuine emotion or residual effects of divine manipulation. The crowd's reaction reflected the unprecedented nature of witnessing Atalanta's first defeat in any form of athletic competition, with spectators displaying combinations of amazement, confusion, and concern about the implications of this dramatic reversal. Many observers had travelled great distances specifically to witness her legendary speed, making her unexpected defeat a shocking conclusion to what had been anticipated as another demonstration of her invincible abilities. The visible presence of divine intervention added layers of meaning that required careful interpretation by religious authorities and cultural commentators. The immediate aftermath of Hippomenes' victory created a complex tableau of triumph, confusion, and divine obligation that would define the final phase of Atalanta's legendary independence. King Assus, bound by the terms of the racing challenge he had sanctioned, formally declared Hippomenes the winner and announced the immediate betrothal of his daughter to the Boeotian prince. The ceremonial aspects of this declaration followed ancient protocols for royal marriage arrangements, with witnesses from both kingdoms present to validate the legitimacy of the union and ensure its recognition throughout the Greek world. Atalanta's response to her defeat and the announcement of her engagement revealed the psychological complexity of her situation as someone whose entire identity had been built upon athletic superiority and personal autonomy. Her silence during the formal proceedings masked internal turmoil that combined disappointment at her unexpected loss with confusion about her own behaviour during the race. The Golden Apple's influence had awakened desires and impulses that conflicted with her established commitment to Artemis, creating emotional conflicts that she lacked the framework to process or resolve. The wedding preparations began immediately following the race's conclusion, as King Iasus recognised the political necessity of formalising the union before circumstances could arise that might threaten the arrangement. Ancient Greek royal marriages required extensive planning and coordination between multiple kingdoms, involving not only the immediate families but also diplomatic representatives, religious authorities, and military advisors who needed to negotiate the specific terms of the alliance. The compressed timeline created logistical challenges that required unprecedented coordination and resource allocation. Hippomenes' behaviour during the engagement period demonstrated both his genuine affection for Atalanta and his growing complacency about maintaining the divine favour that had enabled his victory. His attentions toward his bride-to-be reflected sincere romantic interest rather than mere political calculation, as he sought to establish emotional connections that transcended the circumstances of their initial meeting. However, his focus on immediate concerns gradually displaced the religious observances and gratitude rituals that proper relationship with divine benefactors required. The theological implications of their union created unprecedented challenges for religious authorities throughout both Arcadia and Boeotia, as the marriage involved a devoted follower of Artemis, whose vow of chastity had been central to her identity and divine protection. Priests and seers debated whether Atalanta's defeat in the race constituted divine permission for her to abandon her previous commitments, or whether her marriage would violate sacred obligations that could provoke supernatural retribution. These discussions influenced the wedding ceremony's structure and the specific rituals that would be employed to secure divine blessing for the union. The wedding ceremony itself incorporated elements designed to honour multiple deities while managing the complex religious dynamics surrounding both participants' divine relationships. Traditional marriage rituals honouring Hera as the goddess of matrimony were combined with special observances recognising Aphrodite's role in bringing the couple together and Artemis's previous protection of the bride. The ceremonial complexity reflected ancient Greek understanding that marriages involving individuals with strong divine connections required careful management to avoid supernatural complications. Atalanta's transformation from independent huntress to royal bride involved dramatic changes in lifestyle, social expectations, and personal identity that created ongoing psychological stress, despite her apparent acceptance of the situation. The domestic responsibilities expected of married women in ancient Greek society conflicted fundamentally with the wilderness adventures and athletic competitions that had defined her existence for decades. Her attempts to adapt to conventional feminine roles while maintaining aspects of her previous identity created tensions that affected both her relationship with Hippomenes and her standing within court society. The early months of their marriage appeared successful to external observers, as both partners made visible efforts to accommodate each other's needs and expectations while fulfilling their respective royal obligations. Hippomenes proved more accepting of Atalanta's unconventional background than many husbands might have been, allowing her to maintain certain aspects of her athletic training and hunting activities within the constraints of married life. Their public appearances suggested mutual affection and respect that validated the romantic aspects of their union beyond its obvious political advantages. However, the fundamental issue of Hippomenes' failure to properly acknowledge Aphrodite's crucial assistance in winning Atalanta's hand began creating subtle but growing problems that would eventually threaten their happiness. Ancient Greek religious tradition required specific rituals and ongoing observances to maintain positive relationships with divine benefactors, particularly when their intervention had provided extraordinary benefits. The goddess of love expected regular sacrifices, temple dedications, and public acknowledgements that recognized her role in creating successful romantic relationships. Hippomenes' neglect of these religious obligations reflected both his absorption in married life and his gradual assumption that his victory had been primarily due to his own athletic abilities and tactical planning. The success of his strategy had created confidence that displaced the humility and gratitude that proper divine relationships required. His focus on immediate concerns like establishing his position within the Arcadian court and managing the practical aspects of his new royal status left little attention for the ongoing spiritual maintenance that his divine debt demanded. The specific nature of Hippomenes' religious negligence involved multiple failures that compounded over time to create serious theological problems. He failed to establish regular sacrifice schedules honouring Aphrodite, neglected to dedicate appropriate portions of his wedding gifts to her temples, and most significantly, began publicly attributing his victory to personal merit rather than divine assistance. These omissions violated fundamental principles of ancient Greek religious practice, while demonstrating dangerous hubris that historically provoked severe divine punishment. Aphrodite's growing displeasure with Hippomenes' ingratitude manifested initially through subtle signs that experienced religious observers might have recognized as warnings. The goddess's influence over romantic relationships meant that her anger could affect not only the immediate targets of her displeasure, but also the broader dynamics of love and attraction within their community. Early indicators included increased marital tensions among other couples in the royal court, unsuccessful matchmaking attempts by professional marriage brokers, and general disruptions in the romantic harmony that typically characterize successful kingdoms. The escalation of divine displeasure followed predictable patterns established in numerous other Greek mythological narratives involving ungrateful mortals who failed to maintain proper relationships with their divine benefactors. Aphrodite's initial subtle warnings gave way to more direct interventions designed to remind Hippomenes of his obligations and provide opportunities for correcting his behaviour before more severe consequences became necessary. These intermediate punishments included minor romantic difficulties, temporary cooling of passion between the married couple, and increased susceptibility to temptation that tested their commitment to each other. The catalyst for the final divine punishment came through a seemingly minor incident that revealed the depth of Hippomenes' religious negligence and provided Aphrodite with justification for severe retribution. During a journey between royal residences, the couple encountered a sacred grove containing a temple dedicated to the goddess of love, presenting an obvious opportunity for Hippomenes to demonstrate gratitude through appropriate offerings and prayers. His decision to pass by without stopping or acknowledging the shrine constituted a deliberate insult that transformed his previous negligence from mere oversight into active disrespect. The sacred grove where this crucial incident occurred belonged to an ancient category of religious sites that demanded recognition from all travellers, particularly those who had benefited from the resident deity's favour. These locations served as tests of character and piety that revealed individuals' true attitudes toward divine authority and their understanding of proper relationships between mortals and gods. Hippomenes' failure to observe appropriate protocols demonstrated not only personal ingratitude, but also dangerous pride that threatened the cosmic order that divine intervention was designed to maintain. Atalanta's response to her husband's religious negligence revealed the ongoing tension between her previous devotion to Artemis and her new role as a married woman subject to different divine influences. Her awareness of proper religious protocols, developed through years of service to the goddess of the hunt, made her uncomfortable with Hippomenes' casual attitude toward divine obligations. However, her position as his wife created conflicting loyalties that prevented her from directly challenging his decisions or independently fulfilling the religious duties that he was neglecting. The specific location where divine punishment would eventually manifest added symbolic significance to the consequences that Aphrodite was preparing for the ungrateful couple. The goddess's choice of venue reflected both practical considerations about privacy and dramatic impact, and deeper theological meanings related to the nature of their offences and the appropriate forms of retribution. Sacred spaces provided ideal settings for divine interventions because their religious significance made supernatural events more comprehensible to mortal witnesses, while reinforcing the connection between specific actions and their cosmic consequences. The Temple of Cybele, identified in most ancient sources as the location of the couple's ultimate transgression, represented a particularly significant choice for Aphrodite's revenge due to the complex relationships between different aspects of divine feminine power. Cybele, the great mother goddess whose worship had spread throughout the Greek world from its origins in Anatolia, embodied primal, creative and destructive forces that complemented and sometimes competed with Aphrodite's more refined influence over romantic love. The selection of Cybele's sacred space as the setting for punishment created theological resonances that enhanced the dramatic impact of the divine intervention. The circumstances that led Hippomenes and Atalanta to enter Cybele's temple revealed the subtle ways in which divine will could manipulate mortal behaviour to create situations where justice could be administered. Their decision to seek shelter in the sacred space during a sudden storm appeared to result from natural circumstances and practical necessity, but ancient Greek religious understanding recognized that such coincidences often reflected divine planning rather than random chance. The goddess's ability to coordinate weather patterns, travel schedules, and emotional states created opportunities for intervention that appeared natural while serving supernatural purposes. The psychological state of both participants as they entered the temple reflected the cumulative effects of months of growing tension and unresolved conflicts that had undermined their initial romantic happiness. Hippomenes' continued neglect of his divine obligations had created spiritual imbalances that affected his judgment and self-control, while Atalanta's struggle to reconcile her previous identity with her married role had generated emotional instabilities that made her vulnerable to impulsive behaviour. These internal conflicts created the conditions necessary for the transgression that would trigger their ultimate punishment. The sacred space of Cybele's temple possessed architectural and decorative features that emphasized the goddess's connection to wild nature and primal creative forces. Ancient descriptions of such temples indicate elaborate decorations featuring lions, wild boars, and other dangerous animals that represented the untamed aspects of natural power that the goddess controlled. The interior spaces typically included multiple chambers designed for different types of religious observances, with the innermost sanctum reserved for the most sacred rituals and containing the cult statue that served as the focal point for worship. The specific nature of the sacrilegious act that Hippomenes and Atalanta committed within Cybele's temple involved the violation of sacred space through inappropriate sexual activity that transformed a place dedicated to divine worship into a venue for mortal passion. This transgression represented multiple levels of religious offence, including disrespect for the goddess's sacred space, contamination of ritual purity required for proper worship, and the demonstration of uncontrolled desire that violated the self-discipline expected of individuals who had received divine favour. The timing of their transgression, occurring during daylight hours when temple activities would normally be conducted, added to the severity of their offence by creating the possibility that priests, worshippers, or other visitors might witness their inappropriate behaviour. Ancient Greek religious law regarded such public violations of sacred space as particularly serious, because they threatened the community's relationship with the offended deity and could provoke collective punishment that affected innocent individuals along with the actual perpetrators. The psychological dynamics that led to their sacrilegious behaviour reflected the complex interplay between suppressed desires, divine manipulation, and the gradual erosion of moral restraints that characterised many Greek tragic narratives. Atalanta's years of enforced chastity had created psychological tensions that her marriage had only partially resolved. While Hippomenes' success in winning her had generated overconfidence that extended to his attitude toward divine authority, the combination of these individual vulnerabilities with Aphrodite's deliberate manipulation of their emotional states created conditions where rational judgment gave way to impulsive action. The immediate aftermath of their transgression involved a period of confused recognition as both participants gradually understood the magnitude of their offence and the inevitable consequences that would follow. Ancient sources describe their initial reactions as combining physical satisfaction with growing spiritual dread, as their rational minds processed the implications of violating sacred space, while their bodies still responded to the pleasures they had experienced. This psychological complexity reflected sophisticated understanding of how guilt and fear could coexist with physical gratification in ways that intensified rather than resolved internal conflicts. The divine response to their sacrilege began manifesting immediately through subtle environmental changes that indicated supernatural displeasure and foreshadowed more dramatic punishments to come. These initial signs included sudden temperature drops within the temple, unexplained sounds that suggested the presence of invisible observers, and changes in the behaviour of animals near the sacred site that reflected their sensitivity to divine anger. Experienced religious practitioners would have recognised these omens as warnings of impending supernatural intervention, but Hippomenes and Atalanta's emotional state prevented them from properly interpreting the signs. The transformation of Hippomenes and Atalanta into lions represented not merely divine punishment, but the beginning of their metamorphosis into enduring symbols that would transcend their original mythological context to influence literature, art, and cultural discourse for millennia. Cybele's specific choice of leonine form for their punishment carried profound symbolic weight within ancient Mediterranean religious traditions, as lions represented both royal power and untamed natural forces that existed beyond human social conventions. The goddess's decision to bind them eternally to her chariot service created a complex image of punishment and honour that ancient audiences understood as reflecting the ambiguous nature of divine justice. The earliest literary treatments of Atalanta's story appeared in fragmentary epic poems dating to the 8th and 7th centuries BC, preserved primarily through citations in later grammatical works and mythographical compendiums. These archaic sources emphasized her connection to Artemis and her exceptional hunting abilities, while treating her athletic achievements as secondary elements of her legend. The Catalogue of Women, traditionally attributed to Hesiod but likely composed by multiple authors over several generations, provided one of the most comprehensive early accounts of her genealogy and major adventures, establishing textual precedents that would influence all subsequent literary treatments. Pindar's victory odes, composed during the 5th century BC for athletes competing at major Greek festivals, included several references to Atalanta that reveal how classical audiences understood her significance within the broader context of athletic achievement and divine favour. His 10th Pythian ode contains a brief but significant allusion to her wrestling victory over Peleus, presented as an example of how exceptional individuals could transcend conventional limitations through dedication to excellence and proper relationship with the gods. These references demonstrate that her story had become sufficiently well known by the classical period to serve as shorthand for discussing themes of athletic prowess and gender transgression. The tragic dramatists of 5th century Athens found in Atalanta's story rich material for exploring the tensions between individual desire and social obligation that characterized their most successful works. While no complete tragedies focusing on her survive, fragments and ancient testimonies indicate that both Aeschylus and Euripides composed plays dealing with various aspects of her legend. Aeschylus apparently emphasized the religious dimensions of her story, particularly her relationship with Artemis and the consequences of abandoning divine service for mortal love. Euripides' treatment, based on surviving fragments, appears to have focused more heavily on the psychological complexity of her character and the social pressures that shaped her choices. The development of prose mythography during the Hellenistic period produced the most detailed and systematic accounts of Atalanta's adventures that have survived from antiquity. Apollodorus's library, compiled during the 1st or 2nd century AD but drawing on much earlier sources, provides the most comprehensive ancient narrative of her life from birth through divine punishment. His account attempts to reconcile the various regional traditions and chronological inconsistencies that had accumulated over centuries of oral transmission, creating a standardized version that would influence all subsequent retellings of her story. The Roman appropriation of Greek mythological material transformed Atalanta from a specifically Greek cultural figure into a more universal symbol of female excellence and the dangers of challenging traditional gender roles. Ovid's treatment in the Metamorphoses represents the most influential ancient literary version of her story, combining sophisticated psychological insight with narrative techniques that emphasize the tragic inevitability of her fate. His account of the racing contest includes details about the golden apples and their psychological effects that demonstrate remarkable understanding of human motivation and divine manipulation, while his description of the final transformation provides vivid imagery that would inspire artists for centuries. The artistic representation of Atalanta in ancient Greek pottery reveals evolving attitudes toward female athletes and the cultural significance of her legend across different historical periods. Early archaic vase paintings typically depicted her in hunting scenes alongside male heroes, with her gender indicated primarily through clothing and hairstyles, rather than distinct physical characteristics. These early representations emphasized her integration into heroic narratives, while maintaining a visual conventions that preserve traditional gender distinctions even when portraying unconventional behavior. Classical period pottery shows increasing sophistication in the artistic treatment of Atalanta's story, with painters developing iconographic conventions that could convey complex narrative elements within the constraints of ceramic decoration. The famous amphora by the Antimenes painter, dating to approximately 520 BC, depicts the Calydonian Boar hunt, with Atalanta clearly identified through inscription and positioned prominently among the assembled heroes. Her portrayal in this work emphasizes her athletic build and confident bearing, while maintaining feminine characteristics that distinguish her from male participants, reflecting classical Greek attempts to reconcile exceptional female achievement with conventional gender expectations. Red figure pottery from the late 5th and early 4th centuries BC demonstrates increasing interest in the psychological dimensions of Atalanta's story, particularly the racing contest with Hippomenes and its aftermath. These works often focus on moments of emotional intensity, such as her reaction to the golden apples or her transformation into a lion, using sophisticated artistic techniques to convey internal states and complex motivations. The technical advances in pottery painting during this period enabled artists to create more nuanced and psychologically compelling representations that enhanced the story's dramatic impact. Hellenistic sculptural treatments of Atalanta reflected the period's interest in dynamic movement and emotional expression, with several major works depicting her in action during hunting or racing scenes. The famous sculpture group from the Villa Adriana, though Roman in date, preserves Hellenistic artistic traditions in its portrayal of Atalanta and Hippomenes during their fateful race. The sculptor's attention to anatomical detail and movement dynamics creates a sense of immediate physical presence that allows viewers to experience the tension and urgency of the competitive moment. Roman artistic interpretations of Atalanta's story often emphasized its moral dimensions, using her fate as a cautionary tale about the consequences of challenging divine authority and social conventions. Frescoes from Pompeii and other Roman sites frequently depicted her transformation scene, with particular attention to the moment of recognition when she and Hippomenes realize their punishment. These works served both decorative and didactic functions, providing visual entertainment while reinforcing cultural messages about proper behavior and the dangers of excessive pride or religious negligence. The iconographic significance of specific elements within Atalanta's artistic representations reveals how different cultures and historical periods interpreted the symbolic meaning of her story. The golden apples, for instance, appear consistently in artistic depictions of the race, but with varying degrees of emphasis and symbolic elaboration. Early Greek representations treat them primarily as narrative devices, while later Roman works often surround them with additional symbolic elements that connect them to broader themes of temptation, desire, and divine intervention in human affairs. The bear imagery associated with Atalanta's early life provided artists with rich symbolic material that connected her story to broader themes of civilization versus wilderness and the relationship between human and animal nature. Artistic representations of her rescue and nurturing by bears often emphasized the liminal status this experience created, showing her as simultaneously human and wild in ways that conventional social categories could not easily accommodate. These images serve to explain her exceptional abilities while reinforcing the idea that such achievements required supernatural or quasi-supernatural origins. The medieval period saw significant transformation in how Atalanta's story was understood and transmitted, as Christian cultural frameworks reinterpreted pagan mythological material according to different moral and theological principles. Medieval mythographers like the anonymous authors of the Ovid Moralis transformed her story into an allegory about the dangers of worldly desire and the importance of maintaining spiritual focus. These reinterpretations often emphasized the punitive aspects of her fate while downplaying the heroic elements that had made her attractive to ancient audiences. The Renaissance revival of classical learning brought renewed interest in Atalanta's story as both literary subject matter and artistic inspiration. Humanist scholars produced new editions of ancient texts that made her legend more accessible to contemporary audiences, while artists found in her story opportunities to explore themes of beauty, competition, and transformation that aligned with Renaissance aesthetic values. The period's emphasis on individual achievement and the dignity of human potential created cultural conditions where her exceptional accomplishments could be appreciated more fully than had been possible during the medieval period. The development of opera during the 17th and 18th centuries provided new venues for exploring the dramatic potential of Atalanta's story, with several composers creating works based on various aspects of her legend. These musical treatments often emphasized the romantic elements of her relationship with Hippomenes, while using the competitive and transformative aspects of the story to create opportunities for spectacular staging and vocal display. The operatic tradition established patterns of interpretation that would influence how later audiences understood the emotional and psychological dimensions of her character. The emergence of feminist literary criticism during the 20th century fundamentally transformed scholarly and popular understanding of Atalanta's significance as a cultural symbol. Feminist scholars identified her as an early example of female agency and resistance to patriarchal social structures, interpreting her athletic achievements and rejection of traditional feminine roles as proto-feminist statements about women's capabilities and rights. This interpretive framework has generated extensive academic literature that examines her story within broader contexts of gender studies and women's history. Modern psychological interpretations of Atalanta's story have explored the complex dynamics of identity formation, competitive achievement, and the integration of masculine and feminine psychological elements within individual personality development. Jungian analysts have found in her character rich material for discussing the anima and animus archetypes, while other psychological approaches have examined her story as illustrating themes of abandonment, self-reliance, and the challenges of intimate relationships for individuals with strong independent identities. Contemporary retellings of Atalanta's story in novels, films, and other popular media have adapted her legend to address modern concerns about gender equality, athletic achievement, and the balance between personal fulfillment and social expectations. These works often emphasize her agency and choice, while minimizing or reinterpreting the divine intervention elements that ancient audiences found central to her story. The tendency to modernize her character reflects contemporary values while sometimes obscuring the cultural context that originally gave her story its meaning and power. Archaeological discoveries continue to provide new insights into how ancient communities understood and celebrated Atalanta's legend. Excavations at sanctuary sites throughout Greece have revealed votive offerings that appear to be connected to her cult, including miniature hunting implements, athletic equipment, and bear figurines that suggest active worship practices centered on her legendary abilities. These material remains demonstrate that her significance extended beyond literary and artistic representation to include actual religious observance and community identification. The comparative study of similar figures in other mythological traditions has illuminated the universal themes that Atalanta's story addresses, while highlighting the specifically Greek cultural elements that shaped her particular legendary development. Scholars have identified parallels with warrior women and exceptional female athletes in Celtic, Germanic, and other Indo-European traditions, suggesting common cultural patterns in how societies conceptualized and narrativized female transgression of conventional gender boundaries. Educational applications of Atalanta's story have made her legend a valuable tool for teaching about ancient Greek culture, mythology, and the historical development of attitudes toward gender and athletic achievement. Her story provides concrete examples for discussing abstract concepts like heroism, divine intervention, and social change, while offering opportunities to examine how cultural values and social structures influence individual choices and community responses to exceptional behavior. The enduring appeal of Atalanta's story across diverse cultural contexts and historical periods demonstrates its fundamental relevance to human concerns about identity, achievement, and the relationship between individual desires and social expectations. Her legend continues to resonate with contemporary audiences because it addresses timeless questions about the costs and benefits of exceptional achievement, the nature of love and commitment, and the complex negotiations required to balance personal authenticity with social belonging. The scholarly consensus regarding Atalanta's historical significance recognizes her as one of the most complex and psychologically sophisticated figures in Greek mythology, whose story encompasses themes that remain relevant to contemporary discussions about gender roles, athletic achievement, and the relationship between individual excellence and social integration. Her transformation from abandoned infant to legendary huntress to tragic victim of divine punishment creates a narrative arc that illuminates fundamental tensions within ancient Greek culture, while speaking to universal human experiences of growth, challenge, and transformation. Modern interpretations of her legacy emphasize both her achievements as an individual and her symbolic significance as a representation of female potential in societies that typically limited women's opportunities for public recognition and autonomous action. Her story continues to inspire contemporary discussions about gender equality, athletic participation, and the ongoing challenges faced by individuals who challenge conventional social expectations while seeking to maintain authentic relationships and community belonging. The ultimate significance of Atalanta's legend lies not merely in its entertainment value or historical interest, but in its continued capacity to illuminate the complex dynamics of human nature and social organisation that remain relevant across cultural and temporal boundaries. Her story reminds us that exceptional individuals have always faced difficult choices between personal authenticity and social conformity, while demonstrating that the consequences of these choices extend far beyond individual lives to influence entire communities and cultural traditions. In this way, the Huntress of Artemis, who became a symbol of both achievement and tragedy, continues to speak to contemporary audiences about the enduring challenges and possibilities of human existence.